Okay, can you guys see, ladies and gentlemen, can you see and hear us? Our feed was cut just as we were making our introductions. Should come up in a moment here. Okay. Is that working okay for you ladies and gentlemen? It looks like we've got a whole different link.
When I log in, I don't. It says 68 views.
Wait for a new link to come in.
Okay.
Let me get to what I need to do to make it happen. Because it generated a new link. I have to start over.
We need to start at 6:30.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's because they're interfering with us. It has nothing to do. I tested everything already. It has nothing to do with when we start.
Why don't we just take your authority over this live stream and ask for you to push it through? We ask this in Jesus' name.
Okay, you can see and hear us and all those good things. Excellent. Interesting how our feed was cut just as we were making our introductions. Okay, so my wife Kathleen, da-da-da,
Hi.
she's going to sing for us.
No, I'm not. I wouldn't subject them to that.
Okay, so my wife Kathleen. Okay, let me turn the sound down.
Oh.
Alrighty, we're going to get right into it tonight. Suffice it to say, what we received as a confirmation this afternoon, it takes a lot to stun me. Stun gun on stun. It stunned me. That's the operative word for tonight, stun. Along with the operative number 65,536. This is a confirmation. We're not trying to hype, but it's a confirmation that quantum computing mathematically is modeling, and I'll add to this later, but let's just start it out easy. I don't believe this is conjecture. There's too many confirmations over the years, and we're going to share those confirmations from the past. But confirmation that quantum computing mathematically has modeled the bottomless pit. As always, we'll define that. Mathematically modeled the bottomless pit. Have they opened the bottomless pit? That's where conjecture comes in. That's where interpretation of Scripture comes in. that's where your own conclusions need to be drawn from. We're not going to be dogmatic about whether the bottomless pit has been opened or not. I don't think it has yet. I think obviously we have a lot of seals that need to be opened, and we'll go through that. But precursors, signs of the bottomless pit being opened, the technology, the steps, the mathematics that have to be in place to open the bottomless pit. I think we can make a very strong case in saying that those pieces, those components, those precursors to the opening of the bottomless pit absolutely are in place and are unfolding. And I shared with you during the Wednesday live stream the discussion about quantum supremacy related to the announcement coming out of Google, which virtually on the same day there was the announcement from D-Wave of their 5,000 qubit quantum computer having been sold to Los Alamos National Laboratory. Those are the headlines. You know, there's a lot of detail, a lot of research, a lot of live streams and Entangled magazine articles behind all of that. Here's the point. Write down the number 65,536. That is the focal point of the confirmation. The coverage to date that I have seen and that you have sent to me regarding Google's announcement of quantum supremacy didn't go deep enough. Even Wednesday and Thursday when I went through this with you. Thursday we did the book. We finished 2048 Diamonds in the Rough. Wednesday I covered Google and D-Wave. Even on Wednesday I did not go deep enough because I didn't have the information that we received today. If you want to look up something, look up Nevin's Law, N-E-V-E-N-S, Nevin's Law. Okay? I sent you a couple of articles in the patrons archives on my website. I did not post them through the messaging system of Patreon. Why? I'm not trying to sound like a whole lot of hype and sensationalism here, folks, but I'm trying to keep from getting my account closed on Patreon. Patreon has the same community standards agreement as YouTube. I have to be very careful about what I send through the messaging system on Patreon. That was the reason that one of our close patrons, I'll name his first name, Greg, and he listens every evening. He was the one that first encouraged me when I was demonetized on YouTube to move over to the Patreon platform. He also has warned me of these community guidelines, these standards on Patreon. So therefore, he encouraged me right from the beginning to work with Doug Diamond from Diamond Digital Media, our webmaster, to create an archive area, a patrons area within anthonypatch.com, where we could post whatever we want. It's there. As long as the site's there, you have access to it. So you should have received a username and a password from our webmaster, Doug Diamond. The question came up from 3 people this evening, just before we started the broadcast. How do I find the archives? And I know, these are relatively new people, so that's okay. We're here to answer questions. If you didn't receive a username and password, I will be posting some of the graphics from the article that we're going to be referencing this evening. By Wednesday, I will again be going into a lot more detail. This is just the introduction, folks. A lot more detail. By Wednesday, you'll have in your hands the October 1st edition of Entangled magazine that likewise is covering quantum supremacy, D-Wave's 5000, but it's also including this information that we're bringing to you tonight with graphics and details in the magazine. So by Wednesday, you'll be fully equipped. But between now and then, if you're having issues getting into the archive, Doug Diamond will be sending you instructions with your username and password to help you access those valuable archives. There are over 2 years of live streams, 3 days a week, 6 hours a week of live streams. All of the issues of Entangled magazine for over 2 years now are in there. plenty of other articles and webinars that we've done in the past. So absolutely a necessity that you can have access to those archives. Okay, so we kind of got the legwork out of the way. What we are saying is that mathematically, what we are seeing in the article that I'm going to read to you tonight, I will read it again for the sake of just being able to get it out there to everybody. As I was reading through this, I was up here in our studio area, in our loft, and I was reading this, and I ran down the stairs to Kathleen, and it was, I hardly could talk. And this is because I'm a geek, I understand that, and probably doesn't stun anybody else like it does me. But I almost couldn't read this to her because I understood the implications. And as we talked about it, the implications became even more profound. And I want to share those with you tonight. We couldn't wait to come on and do this live stream. This is just a few hours old information. So appreciate that, you know, I've got all my scribbled notes here. Okay, I mean, it's literally scribble. It's just, we're not even organized. Just going to tell you, we're not organized. We're just going to give you the raw information that we have for today. And by Wednesday, I'll have it organized in the magazine, and I'll have it for the live stream on Wednesday. But it focuses on the number 65,536, but that's just the leaping off point. We're going to show you the numbers. We're going to take the deep dive into the deep end of the pool tonight, because we're going to show you the numbers that are modeling the bottomless pit. And we're going to define what that means mathematically by a pit. It's not complex, very intuitive. I also ask you to go back to the special edition published in 2017 of Entangled Magazine that had a number of articles from several of the, I think it was June through November articles, but please open up that special edition of Entangled so you have it and you can reference it tonight. Because there's a chart of numbers that I couldn't copy and paste into the live stream software this evening. Again, it'll be in the magazine, it'll be in the live stream on Wednesday. We're just doing this as we're literally just running this evening, okay? So that's my monologue. Kathleen, go ahead and your observations on what has happened today.
Well, it was astounding to you when it came together, but it is something that I've speculated on and shared with you. And today we had Google come out with some numbers that basically confirmed our working back, because we knew obviously about this number, and when we began to see the quaternary system in play, you know, and 16 to the 4th power in play with respect to geomancy and quantum computing, we went, it was a smoking gun. That's
totally
it.
Smoking gun.
If there was ever anything that we could do, if people don't even understand what geomancy is, and believe me, you don't have to be a practitioner or understand how it works, other than having the basic understanding of the, you know, we've often said the binary stochastic random number generating process. Yep. You can understand that, you're going to see this. You can't miss it. And then there's no excuse. You're without excuse, really. And
for folks that have never heard any of this information before, and I know that there are many new patrons here, I'm going to put up a graphic of geomantic figures. There are 16. Long-time listeners, you guys, you know, you're yawning. You've heard us say geomancy until you're sick of hearing it. Ad nauseum. But we'll put up the 16 figures, but I'm going to put it up against the numbers from this article regarding Google's quantum supremacy. We'll get into that. But just remember, there are 16 basic figures in geomancy. Those are your takeaways with 65,536.
And they are composed, each geomantic figure is 4 lines. You need 4 figures, so that's 16 lines. And when you pull the whole chart together, you have 64 possible combinations.
Mm-hmm.
And I will let you bring...
Yeah, so let me just read off for you. And again, I'll make a graphic for Wednesday and it'll be in the magazine. Kathleen said that there are 64 combinations, 64 figures. Geomancy, starting with 16, produces 64 because there are 4 lines in each figure, of which there are 16. So you come up with 64. In the I Ching, there are 64 hexagrams. In Ifa divination, there are 16. In another form of Sikidia of divination, there are 16. In Google and in D-Wave, they are using a 16 number process. Again, we're going to lay this out for you. Both Google and D-Wave cite in their papers, in their announcements, quantum supremacy and D-Wave in general about all of their computers, 65,536. What does that number represent? Now, longtime listeners, you already know you have graduated from your postgraduate program years ago on all this. Let's make it simple. Geomancy. Holds true for the others as well. Okay, those are all confirmations. Same systems being used in multiple forms of divination. 16 basic figures, multiplies out to 64, but don't get confused. Take 16 basic geomantic figures. When you shuffle the card deck, when you shuffle the cards of geomantic figures, the maximum number of combinations of 16 equals 65,536 combinations of each individual geomantic figure. So I'll come back on camera here, but let me just put this up here so that you can see it as I'm saying this. On the right are the geomantic figures, of which there are 16 primary. On the left-hand side, I realize this is kind of small to see, but that's as large as I can do it with this software program. That's why I sent it to you. It's in the archives. It'll be reproduced in the magazine. I also sent you the link, and I'll read you the link if you want to Google this so that you can go look at this if you don't have access to the other areas. Type in interesting engineering.com. That's interestingengineering.com. All you have to put in for the subject next to that is Google's quantum processor, quantum supremacy. Google's quantum processor, quantum supremacy, and it'll pull up this article from Interesting Engineering. Now, what I find interesting is that this article was published back in June. Okay, and I missed it. I subscribed to Interesting Engineering, and I missed it. But buried in here, I'm going to jump right to it, and then we're going to backfill all this stuff and give you everything that you need to hear. Coming down this list of numbers to where you see number 4 on the left column. Next to it, you see 16 in the middle column. And then on the right column, it says 2 to the 16th power. We are talking exponential mathematics. So 2, and then you see up in what would typically be in notation, scientific notation, you would see a little tiny 16 in the upper right-hand corner of the number 2. Okay? Here it's just on the same level, but this is exponential. So we're talking 2 to the 16th power equals 65,536.
Or 16 to the 4th power.
Sure. Keeping it simple. This is labeled as quantum computing power relative to classical computing power. Now, let me get back on camera. Come on, program, let's go. Can't keep up with us tonight. Probably because we're getting interfered with. Anyway, here's the deal. June of 2017, I first published 65,536. At that time, I was relating it to two things. D-Wave, of course, and the progression of the numbers of qubits in each one of their computers. The 10th model, let me give you the first. And again, this is why you should be looking at Entangled Magazine right now. You'll see this graphic. The first model sold by D-Wave publicly had 128 qubits. When you double the number of qubits, 2 times 128 is 256, double it is 512, double it is 1024, double it is 2048, double it is 4096, which is the 5,000 qubit computer that has been announced this last week by Google that they have sold to Los Alamos National Laboratory. It'll be presented in mid-2020, okay? And there'll be lots of other people that are buying it. The 5,000 qubit is the 4096. That's the actual number. They just call it the 5,000 because that's for marketing. Like the present one, the 2000Q is just for marketing. But its actual number of qubits is 2048 because it is a mathematical base 2 progression of the number of qubits. And the reason it's done that way is because of the inherent binary system of geomancy. That it is a base 2 mathematical progression of the number of qubits. Because the number of qubits in the processor of the quantum computer is directly related to the numbers that they're crunching, which are binary, which are geomantic, which are based on the 16 geomantic figures of geomancy. That's what the operating system of all quantum computers are based upon, and so are classical computers. But we're focused on quantum tonight. The quantum computer utilizes geomancy, a divinatory practice. The binary system is 2. The multiplication of qubits in the processor is 2. When you get to 4096, okay, you're about at the 5th model. Let me open my own screen here for my own reference. Give me just a moment here. I'm going to read this off. Those numbers I gave you were from memory, and that's as far as, well, 8192 is the next number after 4096. But let me give you some of the bigger numbers in that chart that I'm not able to post for you, but is in Entangled Magazine, in that special edition. You'll be able to find it, and here it is. Okay, so if you're referencing the magazine, it's Interdimensional Communications and Sentient World Simulation. It's just one of many places that I cite these numbers. Okay, so the present 2000Q that I said has 2048 qubits is the 5th model of D-Wave quantum computer. The 6th model, which is coming out next year, Los Alamos 4096, will be the 5,000 qubit as they market it. Now, we're going to jump from the 6th to the 10th model, because the 10th model, the number of qubits in that computer, if they build it, have they built it, who knows? We're just looking at numbers. The 10th model of D-Wave is 65,536 qubits. That's a direct link to geomancy. That is your smoking gun. That's one of many times that 65,536 pops off the page. And we're going to do it again tonight with Google. Okay? geomancy based on binary, 16 basic figures in geomancy. The maximum number of combinations of those geomantic is 65,536. Now, some naysayers may say, well, you're just stretching a point. Of course, it's just mathematics. Of course it's just mathematics. It's a computer.
Well, let me, if I may, read something about geomancy and mathematics.
Sure, go ahead.
The 4 binary elements of each figure allow for the 16 different combination, each called a tableau. As each chart is generated from the 4 mothers, there are a total number of 16th to the 4th power, or 65,536 possible charts. Due to the mathematics of the charts, only figures that have an even number of points total can become what we know as the judges. Each of the 8 judges then has 8,192 charts associated with it. Traditional practitioners of geomancy use this knowledge as a type of parity check on the chart to ensure that no mistakes have been made while computing the figures. In each chart, if all 16 figures are observed, the 4 mothers, the 4 daughters, the 4 nieces, the witness, judge, and reconciler, at least 2 of the figures must be the same. As the reconciler is usually termed an optional figure, 16 combinations of mother figures can yield a chart where the mothers, daughters, nieces, witnesses, and judges are all unique. So,
go back to parity, please, as we did earlier today. Okay? Please read that couple of lines on parity.
Well, it says, due to the mathematics of the chart, meaning the geomantic chart, only figures that have an even number of points can become judges. And each of the 8 judges, again, this has to do with the geomantic chart, then has 8,192 charts associated with it. Traditional practitioners of geomancy use this knowledge as a type of parity check on the chart to ensure that no mistakes have been made while computing the figures.
Okay, and you know that's where I want to place the emphasis. Let me tell you, folks, parity in computing, okay, it refers to errors and error correction. What Kathleen just read to you straight out of geomancy, you could read in a computer science manual. When I read this article to you from Interesting Engineering about Google's quantum supremacy claim, they speak of parity, they speak of error correction, they speak of having one, as Kathleen just said, is it one uncle or one judge? That's set apart. One judge that is set apart to ensure that the errors have been corrected. When you look at the construct of the Sycamore processing chip from Google and their description of their chipset, they say that they have 54, some will quote 56, it doesn't matter. One of the qubits is set aside, just like a judge in geomancy, one qubit is set aside to ensure parity, to ensure error correction. Think of it as a redundant chip. Where did they get it from? It's not purely from computer science. It's not purely from mathematical computation and error correction. It is initiated, it is information inspired from geomancy, because they're not only using the binary system, they're not only increasing the number of qubits in each processor by a factor of 2. And wait till I show you the numbers regarding the number of qubits in the processors at Google. We're going beyond 56, folks. This is going to blow your mind. And I don't talk this way very often. I sound like a YouTuber. But this is just incredible. So, they have built-in parity error correction into the processor, because that is exactly how geomancy is set up for error correction in their divination process. There's nothing new under the sun here. So, we said this is about the bottomless pit. I've gone way too long in this already. I wanted to give you the stage to set this. We need to go to Scripture, okay? Revelation 9:1 from the King James. And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key to the bottomless pit. Very familiar to everybody. Let's go to another couple of verses. Daniel 7:25. One of our patrons asked me, are you going to talk about Daniel 7:25 and time? And again, Kathleen and I were just looking at each other. Did you see this email that just came in? Yeah, we were just talking about time. And we were reading Daniel 7:25. So, he shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time, and times, and half a time. Again, very familiar. Matthew 14:22, and repeated pretty much the same in Mark 13:20 in the King James. Unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days would be shortened. I turn the microphone over to you, if you would like to make comment on that. Or should I just proceed?
You proceed, yes.
I shall proceed, because we'll come back to it. We'll come back to it. Here's the deal, folks. Again, I try to give you the banner headline first, and then we'll backfill from this. We'll support it. In divination, and this is just broad stroke. In divination, what you are doing is taking in all of the variables in the reality. Position of the planets, time of day, calendar month, weather conditions, all of the variables within the reality. And when you run your 16 figures in geomancy, excuse me, when you run your quantum computer using geomancy, makes no difference. Okay, it can be random marks in the sand, Ilal Ramal, the science of the sand. Doesn't matter how you come up with the random numbers, a random number generation. When the basic 16 figures are interpreted, and then advancing beyond that simple example of divination to divination through quantum computing, you are taking in the ancient form and in the modern form, you are considering all of the variables of the environment, of the reality, that you as the diviner, the skilled one, are able to have knowledge of. So a highly skilled diviner will know about astrology and astronomy, will know about the seasons, will know about the movements of the planets and the seasons and the times, will have timepieces for accurate measurement of time, so as to mark a specific point in the linear timeline as it continues unabated to progress. It is this marking, I emphasize, of a point in time. And at that point in time, all of the variables in the environment, in the reality, are combined together to be considered of their influence, the influence of the planets, the influence of the weather, whatever it is. Taking and combining all of the known variables at that specific moment in time in order to produce the highest accuracy of interpretation of the geomantic figures that were randomly produced by a layperson. making marks in the sand. Layperson in the modern, on the keyboard, on the phone. Layperson, random number generator. That's what a layperson is. That's what we are. We are random number generators today and in ancient times. But the skilled diviner today is the geomantic device of quantum computing. This is not sensational. This is not conjecture on our part. You know that we don't make statements unless we have scholarly references to back this up. Okay? So what is a quantum computer doing in terms of marking time? Sure.
I just want to make a comment, if you could. I want to read. Can you bring this over so that they can hear?
I need to make a note then so I don't lose my point here.
It has to do with time.
Yep. Okay. Go ahead.
I wanted to read to you from the Greek version of Daniel 7:25. It says, it's a little bit differently worded. He will speak extremely arrogant words and will wear down the saints of the Most High. He will devise a way to change times and law. He shall be given authority for time, times, and half a time. And I think if a study were to be done of when they are saying he's given authority for time, times, and half a time, is a different time than what they are saying in the time before.
Mm-hmm.
I see it more along the lines of them saying, you know, my grandparents would say, well, we lived in a different time.
Sure.
You know, meaning that life was ordered differently. Industry was different. The way people did business was different.
Mm-hmm.
So in the Greek version, I think it gives us a better way to understand that what they're saying is he will devise a way to change times. In other words, change the way that life is happening. The way we've always done life, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Reach into your purse, get cash out, and you pay for something. We're going to go from that to debit cards. From that, next is cryptocurrency.
Yep.
So he's going to have the ability to change times, the way that we live, the way that we perceive and do life, basically.
Changing the culture.
And interestingly enough, about changing laws, we were speaking this morning that either today or tomorrow or sometime this week, the Sanhedrin is meeting with members of the United Nations.
70 nations.
70 nations, and they are going to be talking about putting the Noahide laws as the, what was the term that you said, as the laws?
The law of the land, and superseding the laws and the authority of the UN itself.
Right. So we can see, based on this Greek interpretation of Daniel 7:25, this in play right now.
Yep.
You know, it's not changing the clock. Oh, he changed it. It was 4:15. Now forevermore it'll be 4:30. That's not what we're talking about.
Nope.
We need to stop pigeonholing our thinking into the literal concrete. Like I said many times, we are moving off of this human platform to a more spiritual platform, which means we have to think and allow the Spirit to take us to that level. Because when you do, you see things differently. Just like when we're talking about or going to go in and you're going to show them the numbers about this bottomless pit.
Yep.
And how our thinking of it as being some big black hole that opens up in the center of the earth and out comes, you know, smoke, fire, and bats and goblins, you know, flying out. That's not what we're talking about here. And when you are able to see these things, it makes absolute perfect sense.
Yep.
Absolute perfect sense.
Because Scripture is multi-layered and deep.
And I want to say it is the key to understanding. Now, you've talked about the 49th key. That was more on a continuation of Aleister Crowley's seeking the understanding of what it was to open the pit.
Right.
Or another way of understanding that is to hasten, you know, Satan's arrival and his supremacy.
Right.
Yeah, I find that use of that word to be very telling.
It is.
Very telling. It is an extremely arrogant statement because they think that they have this thing wrapped up. But let me continue, and then you can go on to the bottomless pit, because I think that it is significant to understand, and I never want to give Satan the opportunity to think that he has it all together, because he's missing some significant pieces. But the court shall go into session, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it forever. And then the kingdom, the authority, and the greatness of the kingdoms under heaven shall be given to the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. So again, keep in mind, it is for a very, very short period of time, as you would look at your clock or calendar. But changing the time also means changing the times, the ways in which we live. So
changing the way that life is conducted, changing the culture of life, changing the norms of life to something else.
And I think the warning that he gives us is indicative of something that happens suddenly. Unlike my grandparents, who said, oh, we lived in different times. There was sort of a gradual progression into these things.
Yep.
My grandmother was able to gradually go from, taking her paycheck and putting it in the bank to, the checking account. And again, my grandmother only had an 8th grade education. God bless her. But a very wise woman. And, but when it got to debit cards, I don't think she learned what a debit card was until, she was close to dying. But in our case, it's all happening so rapidly and so quickly, that it's almost going to seem like in an instant times are going to change. But we need to be prepared, and that's what we're here to talk to people about, so that they can see this.
And the times certainly will change when people take the mark of the beast. Okay, so
into the numbers.
We are talking about quantum computers as modern divination tools, and we're talking about time and marking a specific point in the timeline by the quantum computer. Now, you understand that quantum computers operate much faster than a classical transistor-based computer, even exceeding a supercomputer. That's this whole discussion of Google saying we've achieved quantum supremacy. Now, of course, in the magazine, I'll define that in depth, but let me give it to you just briefly here. It simply means that processing a specific problem in a classical computer will take a certain amount of time. Let's just say it takes 1 second, just to give it some oomph, to give it some speed. It's a fast computer. It solves the problem, very complex, but very specific, very narrow, what they call a discrete problem, okay, in 1 minute. Supercomputer. You put the same problem to a quantum computer from Google, and let's just say, for the sake of discussion, it solves it in 1 second instead of 1 minute. Well, it has now superseded the classical computer. It has achieved supremacy because it's processed to the same accuracy, but at a faster rate of speed. Now, that makes sense. Okay, I don't have to make it overly complex. I'll do that in the magazine for you. And you can just keep turning through the pages and skip all that complex stuff, because I define complexity, I define quantum time, all of that stuff. Live streams, we keep it simple. Okay, so the supremacy is defined by how fast the processor, the quantum processor, compared to a classical based on transistors instead of qubits, it processes that problem and comes to a solution. Now, going back to time, marking time in the timeline, and geomancy, and the quantum computer, no difference. What a quantum computer can do is process information extremely quickly. Think of it this way, and again, you know me, I can make it complex, so I'm keeping it simple. It's like a funnel, and you're funneling down the funnel of time, and here's your timeline running along, and you're trying to narrow down to a specific tiny little dot on that timeline. You don't want a big section of the timeline, you want a tiny little dot. Well, what a quantum computer does is operate at the quantum scale, which means subatomic. It's not dealing with atoms, it's dealing with fundamental particles. Fundamental because they are the particles that make up an atom. We're talking electrons. We've talked about that a lot. It is taking the position of that moving electron. It's always moving. Remember Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. You cannot pinpoint the exact location of an ever-moving electron because it has inherently momentum. But what you're going to do is try to pinpoint the location of that electron that represents a 0 and another electron that represents a 1. And each 0 can be a 1, while simultaneously a 1 can be a 0. That's called superposition. Think of, you have 4 electrons. This is very small little dots in the timeline, right? Electrons are super small. They're subatomic. But that's how narrow your funnel is getting. You're funneling down. Now let's think of a meat slicer. Okay, you go to the butcher, throws the ham on the spinning disc blade, and he says, how thick do you want it? Holds it up and says, you know, it's transparent now. Is that thin enough for you? This is what we're talking about. We're talking about slices in time. So now your D-Wave or your Google or your IBM or your Rigetti quantum computer is a meat slicer of time. And it's taking the meat of the timeline and it's slicing it into super electron thick, the diameter of an electron thick slices of meat, of time. Why? Because you increase the accuracy of your divinatory process, of your divination, and I'll explain that a little bit also, but it increases the accuracy of your divination. Okay? Because you want to know exactly, for example, the position of all the planets that are influencing you, because that's your mantic art. You believe in the planets. It's all crazy nonsense, but you want to know exactly to that, let's call it, you've heard me talk about picoseconds. Let's go down to the femto, F-E-M-T-O, femtosecond, the smallest slice of time that man has developed. And you get down to 1 femtosecond, okay, in time. And now you're able to say, okay, all the variables in reality, the planets, the weather, the people, whatever you are aware of, all that data you're pulling in through the Internet of Things, all of the data that you can pull in the modern time into a quantum computer and combine it at that specific mark in time. And that produces such a high degree of accuracy of your divinatory interpretation of all of those variables. So now we need to talk about, okay, we've pinpointed a point in time using our computer, super accurate, super fast, because speed of computation means you're marking a point in time. So what do we do with this? What do you mean divinatory process? It is interdimensional communication with fallen angels. You are establishing at that point a line of communication in which fallen angels will give you information related to all of those combined variables, information about that specific time. And you know what it all boils down to? This whole thing sounds so complex. But you know what it comes down to? Because this is what happens in divination. When you receive back an answer to a question, because you as the diviner are posing a question for that layperson, posing a question, you're asking through the dimensional, which is what a mantic art is. Okay? It's a dark craft prohibited in Scripture, of which Kathleen and I are not practitioners. Never have been and never strive to be. But you are putting into, as scientists at CERN, at D-Wave, computer scientists will say, we are inserting a problem into a parallel dimension, and we are receiving back, you can see in the magazine, I've given you the absolute verbatim transcripts of Dr. Geordie Rose when he was with D-Wave from back in 2013. I published in Entangle magazine throughout 2017, multiple issues. He said that we are accessing, and this was from 2013 with the 512 qubit computer, 2 to the 500th power of parallel dimensions. Accessing, he says. They're inserting a problem, he says. And they receive back, he says, if we're smart enough, if we're clever enough, we can extract resources from those parallel dimensions. Somewhat paraphrasing, but almost verbatim, right there, okay? This is divination. A diviner sends a question to the fallen angels, to the spirits in another dimension that he or she is communicating with, and receives back an answer. So here's the simplicity of the whole thing. The answer is either yes or no. So I got a $15 million D-Wave computer at Los Alamos, and it's got, at this time, 2,048 qubits compared to Google's announcement of 56 or 54, depending on who you read. And we're not going to get into the comparisons. That's in the magazine. That's on Wednesday. Talk about the differences in qubits. But 2,048 qubits, and what I'm getting back for my 15 million is yes or no. Are you high? What have you been smoking?
Can I say something?
I'm just going to finish this real quick. The point here is that it doesn't matter what divinatory process you're using. Yes and no is the answer. What does that sound familiar to you as? Artificial intelligence. What is artificial intelligence based upon? What is it programmed with? Algorithms. If you look at a flowchart of algorithms, the flowchart branches. Those branches branch yes or no. Then the no can branch to another yes or no. Those are algorithms. That's what AI runs on. You know why? Because AI is based upon geomancy. AI at the highest levels is driven and developed by quantum computing. Why were quantum computers developed? Why were they built? To develop AI, to take AI out of the AI winter that I've talked about and bring it into the spring and bring it forward. It is quantum computing that is driving AI. AI is algorithm, yes or no. Why? Because it's based on the yes and no of geomancy. That's what you get for $15 million, Los Alamos. Yes or no? Go ahead.
Well, I just want to back up and go over a couple of things. I think it's a little bit more detailed with respect to...
Of course it is.
You know, you're mentioning if it's yes or no. I think in geomancy, they can get more detailed information, I'll put it that way. But I want to talk about the word dimension, because I think that that sometimes when we think about the word dimension, we automatically think of Close Encounters with, you know, the Fourth Kind or something. And again, we need to look at the word and how I think it's being, not how I think it's being used. This is my understanding. People can differ with me. But when I think of dimension, I think of, you know, a new way of looking at something, seeing something in a new light. Ironically enough, the phrases that come to mind are things that relate to quantum computing. In other words, you know, when you see something, when they say that puts a new dimension to it, a new way of looking at it, it sheds light on something or puts a new spin on it, if you will.
Yep. And those are all quantum phrases.
Yeah, yeah, and obviously light is a significant tool used in quantum computing. But I think it's important for us to see that when they talk about dimensions, they're not talking about, you know, we say that they're talking to fallen angels, but yes, they are. But what they're doing is they probably wouldn't think of it like that. They would think of it in terms of putting out into the universe, into this
cosmological area. Right?
I don't even know how to describe it. It's just
they just call it universe. They just call it universe.
They put it out into the universe, which we call chance, and they believe that there is some sort of divine intelligence out there that will guide them to the answer. That's what they believe in Kabbalah. Right. It's, you know, energy that directs them, and they come up with the answers, and, you know, but what they're doing is they are taking known information, putting it into a mechanized processing system, using that spiritual side, though they will never say it's a spiritual side. It is very spiritual, what they're doing.
Yep.
When any time a human being goes beyond themselves to something unseen, they are accessing the spiritual realm.
That's right.
When you play with particles, you're playing with the spiritual realm. Why would they call it the God particle at CERN?
Of course, you cannot separate the spiritual from the physical.
When you are trying to force the visualization of something that in its existence was not meant to be seen by the human eye, you are in your hubris saying, I can see something, I can do this, I will do that. So look at the spirit that is, you know, behind that type of a mindset that says, I will see the unseen.
Yep.
You know, now there are certain things that God has let us evolve to in terms of technology, and it has helped us with respect to being able to see certain types of viruses or bacteria, you know, that can help us. But when you go beyond that to create devices that can be used as the standard by which you will forecast and prognosticate about the future and how it will be led, it's a control mechanism. It's not, as you say, it's not benevolent, it's malevolent.
Yep. Because
of the spirit behind it is one that says that I can and I will.
And as DARPA says, why do you do it? Because we can.
And we've always said, just because you can doesn't mean that you should.
Exactly.
You know, but again, when we say dimension, we are understanding it to mean that they are taking information that they've gathered through a process, they've collected it through a random process, and they are putting it out there into what they call the universe, the universal mind. They want to come up with this universal system. Well, what we are explaining to people right now is that universal system. It's used on continents all across the world.
Yep.
Under different forms. It takes on the form of Feng Shui, I Ching in China, Ilm al-Ramal in Arabic for science of the sand, geomancy. It takes on Sikiti out of Africa. You know, so there are many, many different forms of the same random process.
Yep. It is universal.
It is the universal system that they're looking for, and it's the universal system of the beast system that is being used.
And what Google and IBM and Rigetti and Microsoft, apart from D-Wave, what they are seeking is what they call a universal computer.
Right, and this is it. And this is it. And
Yep.
and if people have not been able to see what we're trying to do in exposing what is the foundation of this computer beast system.
Yep.
At the heart of it is divination. And,
Yep.
you know, again, putting it out there to the universe, hoping that putting it out there into these multiple dimensions, as Mr. Rose would say, and hoping to get something back, and we're going to give them something. So what is it that he's going to give them? He's going to give them data.
Yep.
And they've collected it through, I believe they've obfuscated how it is by giving us devices that we can tap in on hardened sand. We tap on silicate all the time.
Yep.
And they pull what they need. They can run those random divinatory sessions whenever they want.
Yep.
They
At
can
a
do it.
very specific point in time.
But they know at that point. They know the hour of the day. They know, you know, they classify it as to whether it's morning, afternoon, evening, the day of the week of the month. They are very much into the calendrical
calendars
aspect of things. You know, then they bring in the cosmological, the astrological, and all of this is dumped into a D-Wave. And all of the parameters are run.
Yep.
And so when we have spoken about it, it's not just Ford going to them or, you know, Volkswagen and saying, well, next year's blue line of Volkswagen Passats, should we go ahead and run that line? And then they go to D-Wave, you know, and they say, well, let's see. And of course they pull in all the logistical data from D-Wave, but really what they're asking for is, should I take the chance and run this line where, you know, our sales may not be as high as we hope they are? Are we taking a chance? What do you think?
Yep.
You know, and that's what they can use it on a large scale like that, or they can use it in estimating the date to announce the peace plan.
Yep.
You know, we know from our study that this aspect of divination has been used by kings and elite members of governments almost since the beginning of time.
Yep.
And to think that it's not being used today, you're deluding yourself.
Oh.
It's probably being used even more now. It is. And having a quantum processor is the result of that.
Of course.
Needing answers faster, quicker, more accurate. So they needed to put this into a system that can spit out the answers quickly.
Well, think about the ancient times. You had a limited amount of random number generators, people. Okay. Today we have more people that are generating more data, and therefore the system is awash in random numbers, which it feeds on, and it can process vast quantities much faster.
Yeah, everything. I think everything has increased at this point, but the fact remains is that you can't define time. You really can't. You know, and to say that you can mark a certain point in time it's almost a lie. Because you really can't.
It's based upon man-made instruments measuring time.
Right, giving us a framework within which we have a point of reference. Yeah, I know, I get that. But when we're looking at the quantum scale, you know, there's really no difference in what they're doing now and what they did back in the days of Enoch.
Sure.
You know, they are still accessing a realm, and anything apart from God himself is accessing information through another means. It's yes or no. You know, it's black and white. It really is. And, you know, I know the Kabbalists would say that they are accessing the divine mind or the divine, you know, they believe that they are accessing God himself. But I just have to look at my own life in respect to that, and I'm not a Kabbalist, you know, and I see his Holy Spirit able to show and instruct me in things of this nature that I had no knowledge of before.
It's quite remarkable.
And it's coming faster and more astounding. You know, like tonight when you start to show them this infinitesimal, you know, from the decimal point onward, it's endless. It's bottomless. It is the bottomless pit. It's this bottomless
You're
pit.
Taking away my punchline.
No, because you need. Now we'll backfill. Now we'll go back and we'll show them.
Yeah.
But the thing is getting people to stop. They have preconceived notions of what because they've been conditioned.
Sure, we've all
been conditioned.
We all have.
Right,
Yeah.
and I include myself
in that. And that's
in
why
that.
it's astounding when we look at the numbers, and anybody just look. And again, we're setting the stage, folks. Anybody that reads this article that is of a secular mind, who's not saved, who doesn't have the Holy Spirit, would read it and say, well, they're just numbers expressing what their computer's doing. And yet when we read it, understanding what has been shared through the Holy Spirit, spiritually, the understanding that we have been gifted, it doesn't mean that we earned it or we did any special works. It just means that when we look at it, we see the numbers entirely differently than someone who doesn't have the discernment of the Holy Spirit. Because immediately we looked at the numbers and went, they're modeling the bottomless pit. And there's more explanation to that. But we looked at it and went, they're modeling the bottomless pit. Whereas a scientist who's not saved would look at it and go, no, it's just showing the processors. So, you people are crazy to say that that's the bottomless pit. We never said anything about the bottomless pit in this article. That's not how the computer operates. Are you people crazy?
Right. What we need to understand is that the language that Jesus spoke in, we're talking also, we have to look at the semantic aspect of language.
Yep.
And communication. And we have to look across the centuries to try and understand that. And we could not do that accurately without the Holy Spirit's guidance to understand it and to see with spiritual eyes and spiritual understanding.
Amen.
What it is that they are saying and what Jesus referred to today, the days right before his return. And when you go into the number aspect and you show them, you look at it and you say, well, that just can go on forever and ever. It's never ending. It's a bottomless pit. And you go,
so let's go to the number.
yeah.
So before I jump to the graphic, I just want to say one thing about D-Wave and their problems. D-Wave operates with what are known as discrete optimization problems. Translation, they're looking at a very specific, narrow, focused problem. Whereas Google, IBM, Rigetti, Microsoft, when they get their act together with theirs, because they're going after a universal computer, they are looking at broader application problems, okay? So when Volkswagen, for example, uses a D-Wave computer or through D-Wave's cloud access system for access to their quantum computer called Leap, they are able to provide, say to Volkswagen, a very discrete problem solution, okay? And it's not going to be, you know, where do we sell the cars? What color should it be? Those would be examples of Google questions, broad application questions. It'll be much more specific for Volkswagen in a discrete optimization problem, okay? More than likely having to do with finances, with money, with investment and expenditure. Parenthetically, sidebar here, this is what D-Wave's first computers were tested on, is the ability to trend the markets, and that continues today. So you start seeing things out there right now in terms of applications that are AI driven, that are financial applications embedded with AI. That all came from the research and development into quantum computing, folks. Okay, so let me put up this graphic. Oh man, let's see, where is this? Come on.
That's important too, though.
Yeah. Okay, so Entangled Magazine, some references for you. In the June edition of 2017 Entangled, the article is CERN's Brain, Quantum Neuroscience. In that article is my first mention of 65,536 tubulin dimers within one human neuron. I said this number was very important. Here's your next reference to that number, and it is in neuroscience. Do you think that the diviners back in ancient Mesopotamia had any idea that the brain even had neurons, much less had tubulin dimers, which are binary pairs representing 0 and 1 within the human neuron, and within that human neuron are 65,536 binary pairs of tubulin dimers, the same number related in the binary 0 and 1 of geomancy. Okay, that's an example of fallen angels developing a system with humans called geomancy based on binary. Where did they get the binary? Where did the fallen angels get the binary from? They got it from God's creation. They got it from the human brain. They didn't create it, they copied it. Again, neuromorphic, the mirroring, the counterfeiting. There's no creation. They have access to the information about our human biology. Okay, look at all the DNA modification that's going on. Where did that come from? Okay, so they knew fully well that they wanted to develop a system of communication that was designed after the human brain, which the human brain communicates with God, with Jesus Christ, through the Holy Spirit, through prayer. So if that's God's system of communication, we're going to create a counterfeit of it based on God's system, which is tubulin dimers, 0 and 1 binary pairs, 65,536 of them within a human neuron. Just so happens, no coincidence, same number of the geomantic figures. It mirrors the human neuron. Okay. Now, the other article was in Silico DNA, June 2017, the bottomless pit. Okay. I outline it all in there for you. That involves quantum computing. Then we go to interdimensional communications and the sentient world simulation. I cited a few minutes ago, 65,536 qubits, the chart there that you need to reference. Then we go to August 2017 in Mandela effect and quantum pollution, where Geordie Rose mentions 2 to the 500th power of parallel dimensions that they're accessing. Okay? All of this stuff is old news to you guys. You've already read this in the magazine. We've been talking about it for years. But now it's coming out. So let's go to this wonderful little article. There it is. Come on. Stay open. Let me put myself on. Let's see. I'm going to put this up, this graphic, while I'm reading this. The graphic on the left comes from this article that I'm just about to launch into. This is from Interesting Engineering, as I said earlier. I'm going to give credit where credit's due. This was published June 23rd, 2019. Title, Google's quantum processor may achieve quantum supremacy in months. Just this past week, they announced that they had achieved quantum supremacy at Google. So bear with me. I'm going to read this for the record. This is an excellent overview. Moore's law famously held that computer processor power would double about every 2 years.
Nevin's law. You said Moore's.
I'm reading right from this. Okay?
Sorry.
Moore's law famously held that computer processor power would double about every 2 years. It's actually 18 months. Okay? They got that wrong. That means the number of transistors you can put in a computer chip, in a processing chip, the number of transistors would double every 18 months. They're wrong here saying 2 years, okay? Moving on with the headline. But now, Nevin's law, N-E-V-E-N apostrophe S. I said it earlier. You need to look that up. We're going to go through it. Anyway, Nevin's law appears to show quantum computing's explosive, quote, doubly exponential growth. Folks, look at Entangled magazine. Look at the graphic I have up. I already told you about this in 2017. They're crediting Nevin from Google's their quantum computing lab at Google. They're crediting Nevin for this supposed law of doubly exponential growth. I already gave it to you back in 2017. They pay attention to these live streams in my magazine. Yeah, I'm blowing my own horn here, folks, but you know what? So what? Okay, before the present Sycamore processing chip from Google associated with their quantum supremacy was the bristle cone. That's in the image on this article. Let's continue. The author says, while I said several months ago that we'd find a way to bring Moore's law back, I didn't expect it to go down like this. In a new report in Quantum magazine by Kevin Hartmut Nevin, the director of Google's Quantum Artificial Intelligence Lab, reveals that the growth in power with each new improvement to Google's best quantum processor is unlike anything found in nature. It's growing at not just an exponential rate, like in Moore's law, but at a doubly exponential rate, meaning we may be mere months away from the beginning of the practical quantum computing era. Now, we will define what doubly exponential rate means. I have the graphic up there if you can see it. I know it's kind of small, but that's showing you double exponential rate. It's a doubling of doubling, okay? It is also known as what Kathleen and I have talked about for a long time, and if you want to interject here, quaternary mathematics, quaternary programming. A doubling of doubling is quaternary programming. In Covert Catastrophe, published in 2013, my first novel, the virus that my characters used to combat the quantum computers in the book to attack the Energy Sciences Network 5 out of the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, feeding all of the luminosity data from collisions to the hub at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, and then disseminated to labs throughout the world. ESNet 5, a fiber optic data transmission network, was attacked in Covert Catastrophe using a virus that I designed after quaternary, and I stated in the book, quaternary mathematics. Let me give you a simple explanation. It's like taking an old mainframe computer from IBM or taking an ENIAC, a room-sized computer, where they use punch cards, and you take a punch card and you put it in the slot and the machine goes crazy. The lights flash, smoke comes out of it, sparklers go off like an old sci-fi movie, and the computer shuts down. And the guy pulls out the card and another scientist says, "What did you ask the computer?" And he flips the card over for the camera, and it says on the back of the card the word "why" with the question mark. The computer just endlessly was cycling through the question of why and finally shut itself, well, it blew itself up. In computer science, it's called halting, machine halting. The computer runs the numbers out, and I'm going to show you these numbers. The numbers out so far to the right that the computer shuts itself down. It halts. Okay? This is related to quaternary, meaning the virus in covert catastrophe caused the computer system to shut down because it could not process the information in a quaternary system, because the computer system was based not on quaternary, but it was based on it was based on ternary, a 3 number instead of a 4 number, or doubly exponential virus. I published that in 2013. Go ahead.
Well, I think that they think that they can attain a quaternary system through that doubling, as you're calling it. You know, when God showed me in a vision, and I know people, I don't say that lightly. It truly was my sitting there through prayer, and then all of a sudden, it just played out in a visual format. How it is that He showed me from the first particulate how His system of expansion worked, and how Satan, when he approached God to enter into this creation process, how he wanted to operate. And so God had He had a system in place. There was always the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. He operated, in His existence was ternary.
Yep.
However, Satan, when he approached God, and again, all I can say to you that this is my understanding of how God showed it to me, and I tried my best in that webinar that we did to put it together so that you could see how the movements go. When Satan approached God about, saying that in order for me to, to be a part of this, I need to be able to operate in a like system. And he was pointing and looking to God in the ternary system of 0, 1, 2. And then the Lord said to him, you will operate in a balanced ternary system of -1, 0, 1, and at every point you will give an account. In computer terms, that means parity check. At every point, Satan was to stop and to give an account, and he is bound to a recursive process, hence the need for annealing. If we are to try and see this in both the spiritual and computational realm.
And right now, Kathleen is talking to people at D-Wave and others in computer science that fully understand quantum annealing. Read the October issue. I briefly define quantum annealing for you. It has to deal with energy and lowest state of energy, and finding the lowest ground state of energy in a parallel dimension with quantum tunneling and quantum entanglement. But go ahead.
So again, we're trying to help those who are involved in computer science and technology to also see that there is a philosophical realm to this. If you will listen to Nietzsche, if you will espouse Ramon Lull, if you will listen and quote Plato, Aristotle, then you need to listen to this, because this is the physical realm that we are talking about.
Or H.P. Lovecraft. Hello, Jordy.
But I mean, we need to be able to talk about quantum physics in a spiritual and philosophical realm, because there really is one. And they, in trying to attain that quaternary system, they're thinking that they can be better faster, but what they've really done is lost control. They've lost control.
And they think that they're identical to God in the quaternary.
But they're not. God, though he is by his own existence, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, your ternary system of forward advancement, always outward, never recursive, always outward, always new, always progressing, always guarding. He encapsulates and factors mankind, humanity, into his
movements,
into his construct, into his construct of life at every level, from the molecular level to the physical realm that we can see and taste and touch and hear. And so he's actually encapsulating and including mankind into his expansion, which makes for the quaternary system. By his own existence, he's ternary. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but his system of advancement is quaternary because he includes mankind in that and in the protection of mankind.
Yep.
Satan is bound. I gave the movements. I showed them to people. When he approaches that very first diamond shape at that point, and he has to go and make his first movement, he has to become vertical at every point. That's that parity check. To give account to God. But at every point that he has to stop in that recursive process, God has advanced outward four steps ahead of him. So he's always encompassing and enclosing humanity within his construct.
Yep.
And the philosophical part of that, and when I lay it out in one of those squares, you know, a 3x3, they would want to call them magic squares, but you can absolutely see it perfectly in a 3x3 square.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that in that webinar.
Yep.
And I would be happy to meet with people to talk to them about it if it would really be important and make a possible change in their life. I would be willing to do that. You know, and to see how God's movement is. Because he showed it to me.
Yep.
I have it written on my board, you know, in the office down in Boston. You know, I have it written out and I can see. And he shows me how it is that he advances and encompasses it in. And that's at a molecular level.
Yep.
And so, you know, they are going to try and operate in the quaternary level, and they'll use it by trying to build upon a binary system, but it's not going to work that way.
It literally is going to get out of control, as you said.
Well, it's out of control because it's endless. And again, keep reading, and then we'll get to the numbers, and it will show that.
Okay, here we go. Here we go. Google's Hartmut Nevin is telling us to get ready. Hartnett's piece should be a major wake-up call for the world. As we've plodded along, thinking that tomorrow would be more or less like today, changing of times, okay, something extraordinary appears to be taking place at Google's Quantum AI lab in Santa Barbara, California. In December 2018, Nevin and his team began running a calculation on the company's best quantum processor when they began to see something unbelievable. Okay? Folks, I warned you about this back in 2017. Here it is. They were able to reproduce the quantum processor's computation using a regular laptop, Hartnett writes. Then in January, they ran the same test on an improved version of the quantum chip. This time, they had to use a powerful desktop computer to simulate the result. By February, there were no longer any classical computers in the building that could simulate their quantum counterparts. The researchers had to request time on Google's enormous server network to do that. Somewhere in February, I had to make calls to say, hey, we need more quota, Nevins told Hartnett. We were running jobs comprised of 1 million processors. Google's top-performing quantum processor was doing something that has no obvious parallels in nature. Doubly exponential growth, Hartnett writes, is so singular that it's hard to find examples of it in the real world. The rate of progress in quantum computing may be the first. I told you in 2017, folks.
May I interject with one thing?
Okay.
Before you go on, the Lord talks about things coming upon the earth as labor pains. I would equate doubly exponential growth from the worldly definition that they are giving us here to equate to the labor pains that Jesus was talking about, where the intensity and speed with which they are trying to progress with technology to change the times that we live in, literally almost overnight, are the labor pains. That doubly exponential growth I would equate to Jesus' reference to labor pains.
I agree, because they come closer together and with greater intensity.
And speed, yes, yes.
And if you look at...
Comes on suddenly.
If you look at in Entangled magazine, you see my doubling of the qubits. And at the 10th model, again, of the D-Wave computer, the number of qubits is 65,536 at the 10th model. when a woman in labor is dilating, typically a woman will dilate to 10 and give birth. Just a little parenthetical, okay?
Yeah, but see how that comes to play with the numbers in just a minute.
All right, so let me get back to the article. The unparalleled acceleration of quantum computing speeds Nevin first identified started... What? Acceleration of quantum computing speeds Nevin first identified started being called Nevin's Law by Google researchers in a not-so-subtle reference to classical computing's Moore's Law, but with a difference. They are of a kind, but what is happening over at Google is not simply the return of Moore's Law for the quantum era. Nevin's Law is showing us that we may be about to plunge into an entirely alien world in a few months. Why would they say alien world? Because they know this is spiritual, folks. They know that this is opening the bottomless pit. Why Moore's Law continues to matter even after its demise. For the past decade, computer scientists and engineers have been anticipating the seemingly abrupt end of progress. Moore's Law, a rough guideline that says a silicon transistor can be reduced in size by about half about every 2 years, has been functionally dead for at least a couple of years now. While it lived, however, it was able to cram more and more transistors onto chips of various sizes, first empowering mainframes, then servers, then personal computers, and now mobile devices. Every couple of years, each new device wasn't just an improvement. There would be a revolutionary technological changes as often as twice or 3 times in a single decade. The doubling of processing power in each generation of computer chips every 2 years, and the consequence of that rate of growth is the leap made by going from punch card computers calculating the flight paths of Apollo astronauts heading to the moon to the birth and maturing of the internet, blazing fast computers in our pockets, and neural networks that can run the entire civil service infrastructure of cities in China in less than 50 years. The technological leap humanity made with the silicon transistor was the single greatest innovation in human history. No other discovery or invention, not even fire, has transformed so much, so fast in our human experience, and we've known for at least a decade that this pace of change could not go on forever. As transistors are reduced to just 7 nanometers long, engineers are fighting to keep an electric charge flowing in channels whose walls are only atoms thick. Make the transistor any smaller, and the electric current that powers the processor's calculations and logic simply jumps the channel or leaks out of the component after atoms meant to contain the flow of electrons are disrupted over time. As the transistors begin to fail and leak their electrons into other components, those too wear down faster and experience higher rates of error, inhibiting the performance of the processor as a whole until the whole thing becomes a useless, leaky sieve of electrons. Since engineers cannot stabilize the components of the processor if they go any smaller, the silicon chip has reached its physical limit, bringing an end to Moore's Law, and with it the expectation that 2 years from now, computers will be twice as fast as they are today. We don't like this at all, to say the least. We can see the technological potential peaking up on the horizon. To come so close and be restrained by physical laws is the kind of thing that first drove us to innovate in the first place. So what do you do if you can't make a faster computer using atomic scales? Scientists and engineers inevitably took the next step and looked for something smaller than the atom for an answer, to quantum mechanics. The quantum world. The quantum world, however, is not at all like the classical world. Exotic subatomic particles behave in ways that are hard to accept. They can blow right through foundational laws of physics without missing a step, as quantum entanglement does when paired particles communicate instantaneously with each other, even if they are on opposite sides of the universe. Schrödinger himself, one of the principal discoverers of the quantum mechanics, proposed his famous thought experiment about a cat in a box, which is both alive and dead at the same time, to demonstrate how absolutely absurd his theories were becoming. He couldn't believe that it was exactly as it appeared. As maddening as it was, the unavoidable fact is that Schrödinger's cat is indeed both alive and dead at the same time, and will remain so until an observer opens the box to check on it. That is the moment the universe has to decide in purely random fashion, okay? That is the moment the universe has to decide in purely random fashion what the ultimate state of the cat actually is. That is geomancy, folks. Not only has this superposition of Schrödinger's cat been proven in practice, but the superposition of particles is also where the power of a quantum computer comes from. By operating on a particle in superposition called a quantum bit or qubit, vastly more data can be contained in quantum memory with far fewer bits than in classical computers. And operations on a qubit apply to all possible values that qubit takes on. When these qubits are paired with other interdependent qubits, can perform vastly more complicated logic operations in significantly less time. The potential for drastically improved processing speed over classical processors is what is driving so much of the hype around quantum computing right now. It's our way of keeping the current rate of progress going, no longer confined to the water's edge by the end of Moore's law. Folks, we're getting to it, okay? You know all this stuff already. All right, how quantum computing is guaranteed to upend our technology. So how powerful is quantum computing exactly then? What does this speed translate into in real terms? For a while, the answer was nothing. It was actually a ridiculous idea that no one really took seriously. Proposed in various ways over the years in academic papers since the 1970s, it popped up every now and again, but not only was it impossible to imagine such a system in practice, such a machine wouldn't serve any real purpose to justify even investing money to investigate it. Then in 1994, mathematician Peter Shor published a paper that changed everything. Folks, you know all about Peter Shor and his algorithms. Shor created an algorithm that cracked open a brutally intractable math problem that is the basis for modern RSA cryptography, the problem of prime factorization of integers. Prime factorization is a several thousand digit long integer. Is just not something a classical computer can do efficiently, no matter how many processors you throw at it. The necessary algorithms either aren't known or don't exist. Even as modern computers became more powerful and were able to use raw processing power to crack earlier 256-bit and 512-bit and even higher bit count encryption keys, all one would need to do is multiply the bit count used for your key by 2, and your new scheme was literally exponentially stronger than the one that just got cracked. Folks, let me parenthetically say, you recognize the number 256 and the number 512. Again, these are binary power of 2 progressions. Quantum computer D-Wave, 128, then double, 256, next model, the 512, and so forth and so on. They all operate in the same manner. Talking about 256-bit and 512-bit is in the context of encryption. Okay? Encryption itself, cryptography, is based upon geomancy because it is based on binary 0 and 1. Superposition of 0 and 1 is based upon geomancy's binary 0 and 1. We're taking you right down to the nitty-gritty roots of all of this. Okay. A classical computer doesn't get exponentially better at solving these problems as the numbers involved increase. This limitation, known as time complexity, eventually puts some things beyond classical computers' capacity to ever really solve. Lengthening RSA encryption keys can very quickly begin to add millions, billions, and even trillions of years to the time needed to crack the encryption key using a classical computer. Folks, let me parenthetically refer you back to Revelation 9, the key to the bottomless pit. I have said for years, it is a secret code. It is an encrypted code. Okay? This is what they're seeking. In cryptography, when you encode information, you encrypt it, you use either a private key or a public key to encrypt, and you use the same either private or public key to decrypt it. That is the key to the bottomless pit. I've said that for 8 years now. Okay, here we go. What Shor showed was that using the superposition of qubits would allow you to solve the factorization problem significantly faster. It might still take a long time to break open the toughest RSA encryption, but a trillion year problem was made into a 2 to 5 year problem with a quantum computer, and only with a quantum computer. Now here comes Nevin's law. If Nevin's law bears out, quantum computing will be here in under a year. Talk about birth pangs, folks. People finally took notice that Shor published his paper and realized this was something completely different than classical computing and potentially orders of magnitude more powerful. Folks, parenthetically, I told you that the prototype D-Wave computers, going back into 2007, 8, and 9, were all based upon, as their proof of concept, as their beta test, the ability to crack Shor's algorithm 2048 and 4096. The same numbers you see in geomancy, the same numbers you see in the progression of the model numbers of the quantum computers based on base 2, okay, 2048, one of the models of D-Wave quantum computers, now called the 2000. 4096, Shor's algorithm, is the up-and-coming 5000 qubit, which is a 4096 qubit chipset. The number of qubits has to correspond to the encryption because it's all based on geomancy. Okay? I hope this is all knitting together for you. All right, people started to see the potential, but in the 20-plus years since Shor's algorithm first appeared, running that algorithm and maybe a few other quantum algorithms published in the years since remain the only reason why we'd ever need a quantum computer in the first place. We have been told that it will change everything, and we have waited as very, very little seems to be happening in reality. Let me dissect that for you. They saw the potential in 20 years ago in Shor's algorithm. They understood the significance of being able to crack those algorithms. Now, that's not only significant in terms of communications that are encrypted using RSA encryption, but it also means that by cracking Shor's algorithms 2048 and 4096, they knew that they had a verified computing system that could crack. They could discover the key. When you break an encrypted message, you are discovering the key that first encrypted the message or the instructions in the first place. What they're building a quantum computer to do is to identify the key that was used to encrypt the secret information that leads to the opening to the bottomless pit of Revelation 9:1. To discover the key, you can crack the code. You can read the information and follow the instructions. Their computers, they believe, are on track to do just that. Go ahead.
I say that, but it's a bottomless pit versus a bottomless pit. Yes, they're looking for the key to crack the core, the code for Shor's algorithm. However, the accessing of numbers that will never cease, that go on to infinity, is in itself a bottomless pit. And the only time that the marble stops on the roulette wheel and they say, this is it, is when God says, this is it. But I think it's important that they that they understand. You know, they're running these iterations, and it's almost like it's a never-ending process until at some point it has to stop. And it won't be random. It's a time that's designated by God.
God will halt the computer.
But I was just looking up, you know, we're talking about, and it keeps coming into play here as we're reading these things, about birth and labor pains. And the birth of the internet, believe it or not, is coming up this month. October 29th, 1969 was the official date of the birth of the internet by ARPA, if you can believe it.
Mm-hmm.
And
the Advanced Research Project.
That's right,
Agency.
right. And it was funded by our government. And so if you think of October 29th, 1969, and where we're at right now, and now the super speeding up of, you know, computer technology, if that is not an indication, too, of the labor pains increasing. And I think you're gonna get to it right now. I know. Go ahead.
In 1969, they were still using room-sized mainframe computers.
Yeah, Stanford Research Institute computer in Menlo.
There it is, SRI.
Yep, Menlo Park. Siri, you get that? Siri, and now we have Siri that we ask for everything. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Even many computer science professionals, including PhDs and industry veterans who know the science behind it all, have expressed skepticism that quantum computing will deliver its at times unbelievable promise. That may be changing, however. After Nevin went public in May about the incredible growth of Google's quantum processors at Google's Quantum Spring Symposium and introduced the world to the, quote, law that bears his name. What I'm going to read to you is going to get a little complex, so of course, as I always do, I will translate it for you. I'm just going to read through it and then let me translate it. Okay. He revealed that what he and the rest of Google's quantum computing team were looking at was the doubly exponential growth of quantum computing power relative to classical computing. It looks like nothing is happening. Nothing is happening. And then, whoops, suddenly you're in a different world, he said. That's what we're experiencing here. What does doubly exponential growth actually mean? According to Nevin, there are two factors that combine to produce this incredible rate of growth Google is seeing in its quantum computer chips. The first simply being the natural exponential advantage that quantum computing has over a classical computer, where classical bits, okay, that's a 0 or a 1, okay, where classical bits can only be in one state at any given time, 1 or 0. A qubit in superposition is both 1 and 0. This means that a qubit becomes exponentially more efficient in terms of representing and processing data for each additional qubit added. For any given number of qubits, n, in a quantum processor, they do the same work or hold the same amount of data as 2n classical bits. 2 qubits equals 4 bits. 4 qubits equals 16 bits. 16 qubits equals, drum roll, I want to hear it,
65,536.
Thank you, Vanna. Thank you, Vanna. 16 qubits equals 65,536 bits, and so on. And that was the first point at which I was shocked. I already knew all this, but shocked because I'm reading it in this essentially mainstream article. Because 16 qubits is 16 geomantic figures. 65,536 bits is the maximum number of possible combinations of 16 geomantic figures or 16 qubits. That's a smoking gun, folks. It's not simply mathematics. The naysayers will just say, oh, it's just the exponential and the double exponential. It has nothing to do with the mantic arts and geomancy.
They can't hide that
well,
anymore. They can't.
They can't hide it anymore. This
No.
article is blowing it out. They might as well put geomancy in here because they're speaking the same language as geomancy. But when you know geomancy, when you understand its origins and how it operates, even Ramon Lull in the 12th century in Spain said, when he developed combinatorial optimization, which is the discrete optimization that D-Wave uses today, which is a geomantic process that Ramon Lull was describing.
Ars combinatoria.
Ars combinatoria from Ramon Lull, smoking gun. He was using geomancy. He developed combinatorial optimization, which is at the heart of quantum computing today. Ramon Lull might as well have been working for D-Wave. Okay? Here we go. The second is more directly related to the improvements that Google is making to its quantum processors. According to Nevin, Google has seen their best quantum processors improve at an exponential rate, something that IBM has also seen with its IBM Q System 1. And I highlight IBM as well in the October issue of Entangled. Taken together, Nevin says, you end up with a doubly exponential rate of growth of quantum computing relative to classical computing. Believe me, folks, I'll explain this to you. What does doubly exponential growth look like? That's the chart I have up on the screen right now for you. The classic exponential growth function when dealing with bits is obviously doubling a function defined as 2n in binary systems. How do you double doubling? Simply replace the n in the doubling function with another doubling function. Or, now if you can't see this or you're just listening, you take a normal sized 2 typed on the line and then a much smaller 2 in the upper right hand corner of the larger 2, and then in the upper right hand corner of that small 2 is a small n. That's exponential notation, okay? So it's like saying 2 to the second power, 2 to the 2 power. Like Geordie Rose talking about 500 qubits and parallel dimensions. He said their 512 qubit quantum computer in 2013, their 512 was accessing 2 to the 500th power of parallel dimensions. So we're talking 2 to the second power. Since Moore's law is a doubling function, we can represent Moore's law like this, where n represents a 2-year interval. Classical computing, 2n. You have 1n is 2. 2 is 4. 3 is 8. 4 is 16, and so forth and so on as you progress down the chart. The doubling reads like this, and remember, listen to the familiar numbers of the number of qubits in the D-Wave quantum computer, because this is where they started. They started with the classical process of doubling their qubits: 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, and now comes the first commercial model, 128, the 256, which was not sold publicly, then the 512, the 2 to the 500th parallel dimensions, then the 1024, which was sold as the 1000, then it went to 2048, the 2000, now it's going to 4096, the 5000. So what does Nevin's law look like? It would look like something like this, where n equals each new improvement to Google's quantum processor. And again, this is the image you're looking at on the screen.
They're not seeing that, honey.
Somebody's monkeying. Yes, they are. It's on the left-hand side.
Oh, this one. Okay, all right, sorry. I thought you were talking about the article you were reading.
No. It's the same image from the article.
Okay.
Okay. Quantum computing power relative to classical computing. Let's try to break this down. Go to, from the left-hand side, go over to the third column where it's headed as 2 to the 2n power. Go all the way down to 10, the 10th line, and it says 2 to the 1024 power. Then look to your right and you will see 1 point, and I'm just going to read it for those that can't see it. 1.7976931258623159077051907889, exponentially out to extending out to 308. What you're looking at is an infinite number. They call that the quantum computing power relative to classical computing. When you look at that number, when I looked at the number, and then I ran downstairs and showed it to Kathleen, I said they're modeling infinity. That number I just read to you is an infinite number. It goes on beyond the capacity of a classical computer to compute. 2 to the 1024 is a number that a classical computer has, even a supercomputer cannot compute. This is where the computer stops. This is where it halts. This is where a classical computer halts. A quantum computer doesn't. It continues on into an infinity, thereby mathematically modeling the infinity by a number. The number represents a model of infinity. By definition, a bottomless pit is a pit that is of, I'm losing my voice. A bottomless pit is infinite in its depth. This is why I titled this Quantum Computing Modeling the Bottomless Pit, or Opening the Bottomless Pit. The bottomless pit, if we look at Scripture, as Kathleen was saying, it's more than just picturing it as something that opens up and the locust army comes out and sulfur comes out and brimstone. We have to give the benefit to God that Scripture, the Word, is multi-depth, multi-layered, multi-meaning, and
multi-dimensional.
Infinite dimensional, and that represents the increase in knowledge in this time, a time of His choosing to reveal such insights, that the bottomless pit is being modeled by quantum computers generating these infinite numbers. This is why it was so significant to me, why it stunned me when I looked at this and I went, that represents the bottomless pit. Whereas a secular scientist will read it and say, well, those are just mathematical numbers.
They'll say it's infinity.
But I look at it and I go, no, that's a mathematical model of infinity, therefore the bottomless pit. I think it's pretty straightforward. I think it's pretty intuitive to understand.
And where it goes to 10 on that chart, we were also talking about how when we talk about the Lord likens the last days to being like a woman in labor. You know, we talked about the birth of the internet being in 1969 and how in the last 50 years technology has come so far, and now they are ramping up the double of the double, if you will. Right now is where we're at.
And October is the 10th month.
Yeah, see, it's all, and the Kabbalists all love that. You know, again, it's the perfect scenario and setup for them in their geomantic prognostications. You know, everything has to be announced at a certain time. But when they get to that number 10, you know, a woman, when she reaches 10 centimeters, birth takes place. You know, and so
These are the birth pangs.
I think that this is extremely significant for those of you who have stayed with us and have had the courage to, you know, advance beyond what it is that we're telling you, to do the research also on your own, to look into what we're talking about in terms of geomancy, you know, not to obviously be a diviner, but to understand the process and how it relates to the things that we talk about that are prevalent in our time, and how it translates spiritually so that we can have the eyes to see and the ears to hear at this time. So You know, I used to worry about trying to answer everyone's question perfectly, and it was a tremendous burden to me to think that if somebody did not get an answer to their question, you know, I almost felt like I couldn't sleep at night because I felt like I had to explain everything to everyone. And I have to say that I do the best that I can, and I know Anthony does too. I work a full-time job, so I'm not using that as an excuse. I just want people to realize if I can't get back to you right away or email, you know, I'm typically doing research when I get home at night from my job and talking to my husband, and we're trying to pull it all together, finding better ways to say it or to present it, and find scenarios that we can liken it to that would make it easy to understand. But a lot of this is interactive. You know, you have taken on supporting Anthony in his research, but you're doing it in partnership with him. You know, we are working in conjunction with you, and this requires collaboration. It means that you need to also do your homework. This is so vast, what we're sharing with you. And, you know, the opening of understanding now, the flow of knowledge that God told Daniel at one point to close up and not to access information in that way because you know, it's for the time of the end. Now we're understanding what it was exactly that Daniel and the people in the king's, the advisors to the kings did during those times in terms of using divination to access information. The apostles used a type of geomancy. What they called it was lot, casting of lots. And it was a similar process to geomancy. It was something that they did back then. And when you start studying, you know, the cradle, as we were watching, you know, the cradle of civilization from the Mesopotamia to Egypt, history. You know, from the three major waterways that they were talking about, the Tigris, Euphrates, the Jordan, and then the Nile. You know, when you look at what was happening back in that period of time, this was very common. It's what they knew. They didn't have the Holy Spirit present then to give them, so they were accessing through forms of divination to find out all the information that they needed. And it has continued to this time. As it was in the days of Noah, so it shall be in the coming of the Son of Man. If you cannot put two and two together, the very first thing that I guess I would advise you to do is go and see if your relationship with God is right.
There you go.
If you are not able to understand this based upon the biblical, historical, technological, scientific, mathematical, philosophical, then you need to go back to God and say, what is it that I'm not understanding? Why can I not get this? It is astounding to me that scientists and people in technology have not been able to put two and two together. And it is true that a lot of, you know, people involved in the higher realms of technology and science and medicine, they tend to be somewhat pragmatic and not concerned. A lot, I won't say all, but a lot of them are atheists. They don't want to give credence to, you know, they'll acknowledge an intelligence, but they'll say it's the intelligence of the universe. Well, you know, that's another infinity, bottomless pit thing. So I think, you know, they can't make that correlation, and they're the ones whose hearts are going to fail when they begin to see what this, you know, divining device of quantum computing is going to do when it takes off all on its own and says, yeah, sorry, I don't need your help anymore.
Well, in terms of taking off, let me go into this article again.
Okay, please.
Okay.
Yep.
Because again, and this is the third point that is astounding that they even say this. After the list goes above 6, the numbers start becoming so large and abstracted, you lose the sense of the gulf between where Google is and where it will be in the next step. In the case of Moore's law, it started out in the 1970s as doubling every year, before being revved up to about every 2 years. According to Nevin, Google is exponentially increasing the power of its processors on a monthly to semi-monthly basis. If December 2018 is the one on the list, then Nevin first began his calculations. When Nevin first began his calculations, then we are already between 5 and 7. So let me read that for those that can't see the chart. The one, they had 2, let's call them qubits. But Google's processor had a doubling of the 2 qubits to 2 to the 2 power, which is 4. Okay? So rather than a classical computer with just 2 binary bits, the quantum computer at Google had 4. That was the starting point. He says, we are already between 5 and 7. So 5 would be 32 bits, or in the case of the Google processor, it jumped from 2 to the 2nd power to 2 to the 32nd power. That number reads out at, rather than 4 at the 1 position, it now reads out at the 5th position as 4,294,967,296 bits. Okay? And then to 6, I won't even read the whole number. It's 18 trillion, and then it goes on. That's 2 to the 64th power. In December 2019, only 6 months from now, when this article was written in June, the power of Google's quantum computing processor might be anywhere from 2 to the, this is the exponential number, 2 to the 4096 power times 2, that's TO, 2, the number 2, and the exponent of 8192, 2 to the 8192 power, times as powerful as it was at the start of the year. According to Nevin's telling, by February, only 3 months after they began their tests, so number 3 on the list, there were no longer any classical computers in the building that could recreate the results of Google's quantum computer's calculations, which a laptop had been doing just 2 months earlier. Okay? That's why I said earlier, a classical computer halts at a point in what it considers to be an infinite number and doesn't see any reason to continue going on. That's even a supercomputer. That's what they're saying here. But a quantum computer goes beyond that. All right. Nevin said that as a result, Google is preparing to reach quantum supremacy, the point where quantum computers start to outperform supercomputers, simulating quantum algorithms. In only a matter of months, not years. Quote, we often say we think we will achieve it in 2019. The writing is on the wall.
And that alone, that statement alone, refers to Daniel with Belshazzar when he was at a feast and a hand appeared and wrote on the wall, I think it was like Mene, M-E-N-E, Tackle Harpashem, something like that. But what it means is you were weighed on the scales and found wanting. So even they're using that phrase.
That's a biblical reference right here.
And they probably don't even realize that.
No, because everybody says the handwriting's on the wall. A very common phrase, but again, there's a spiritual component to this, and they're not even aware of it. All right, we're going to plow through this very quickly because I know it's getting late. Skepticism is warranted to a point. It's important to stress that this growth in power is relative to the power of a classical computer, not an absolute measure, and that the starting point for quantum computing not that long ago would be comparable to the UNIVAC vacuum tube era computers of the 1940s and 1950s. Much of much of the core theoretical computer science of quantum computing is still being written and debated, and there are those who have their doubts about whether doubly exponential growth relative to classical computing is truly happening. After all, Moore's law may be done for, but classical computing isn't dead. It continues to improve to this day and will continue to do so as new algorithms are developed that improve the efficiency of classical computers. Still, others say that it isn't enough to just downplay or dispute the rapid progress claimed by Google for its quantum processors. IBM may be more modest in their predictions about, see, they use predictions, more modest in their predictions about quantum supremacy, but they're confident they can achieve it in about 3 years. 5 years ago, many thought we wouldn't see a quantum computer until 2025 or even as late as 2030 and beyond. Now it looks like we may even see the real deal by Christmas. And there's no reason to think that the power of quantum computers won't continue to increase even further once either Google or IBM or even someone else achieves true quantum supremacy. Yeah, I need to unpack a couple of things, but go ahead.
Okay, I just want to assure people before you go into this, to take a deep breath here and realize that Satan has out there his own false prophets that are touting supremacy this and supremacy that. I don't think God ever had to announce his supremacy to anyone. He just is. And the fact that it has to be announced and claimed as such is significant, is a significant indicator of the I don't want to keep using the word hubris, but it's the only one that comes to mind. The arrogance that is displayed and a characteristic of Satan, to claim supremacy over anything, especially over humanity, because that's what quantum computing touts, is that it will be better, faster, quicker, smarter than human beings.
Because of its AI component.
So that you would want to create something that would supplant humanity tells you a lot about the character of the ones behind it, and the character of those who actually believe that they are helping promote
improving on
the blindness is on them as well, because they don't see it, but their hearts will fail when very soon they will. I find it interesting that IBM said that they believe that they will achieve quantum supremacy in 3 years. 3 years. I have my own timeline in my mind, but I think that we need to just take a deep breath and realize that there are different types of false prophets that are out there. It's not necessarily prophets that are out there claiming that there is another God, another Jesus, another Messiah. It's not that type of false prophet. These are the false prophets that they're talking about. The false prophets of Google, the false prophets of D-Wave, the false prophets that are, making these outlandish claims to supremacy in many different varying degrees. So I think it's important that we just take a deep breath and go, okay, I recognize these people and this information for what it is. It's not going to scare me. It's not going to make me, not want to get up and go to work or, continue to live your life. If anything, live a richer life, because you can recognize it, you can see it, and you say, I've got this, and the Holy Spirit is helping us with this understanding, because he doesn't want us to be caught unaware.
This is a confirmation that he's showing us how the beast system actually operates, what it's based upon, where its origins come from. And therefore, that should be encouraging, because God's revealing it at this time to all of us that are seeking the information through him, And that should be a confirmation that God has it all under control, that this is happening according to his timing, that he's revealing to us how this is all operating, that none of it is a mystery to us.
No. No. And Jesus said, I call you friends, and a friend tells a friend things.
That's right.
He said, I would not leave you unaware. And he's true. He's staying true to his word. He isn't. Despite our sinfulness, despite our failings, every day, he's still, sometimes your greatest revelations come after your greatest falls, when you realize it and you're like, oh, I did it again. So I just stand humbled at him that he would even want to do that. So, I don't mean to take you from that.
No, we keep shaking our heads wondering, why is he showing all this to us?
Well, so we can share it with people.
Sure.
We can just share it with people, and they can begin to see it. It's truly an entirely different way of thinking. You're not thinking humanly. I know that sounds crazy. We are fully human. We are flesh and blood, but we are spirit, and never is that becoming more pronounced as these things come to the forefront.
Exactly.
We are having to rely on a more spiritual understanding of what God's saying, because it's not, a sinkhole that opens up the size of the United States and sucks in the ocean. That's the bottomless pit. That's not it. The changing of the times is not losing an hour on your watch. And I think that, we've had as Christians images that have not been refuted. And now when we're faced with this challenge, we have to say, oh, wait a minute, maybe it's not the way that I thought it was going to happen. Maybe, and so our whole way of thinking, and the Holy Spirit wants us to have it right. So he's working to change these hearts and minds, and truth will call to it. Deep calls to deep. We're pretty deep in this stuff, as Eileen will tell you. God bless Eileen. I love her. I love her. But, it's
Yep.
Deep calls to deep. Yep. And that's what we're doing. But we're not going to drown.
No.
We're not going to drown in this.
And we're certainly not treading water.
No. So I think it is very, very important that we not listen to the false prophets that are out there. A lot of what they are saying is hype. Satan is such a liar, and he's so delusional that he really thinks that he can achieve supremacy with God, and we know that that's not the case. Rest assured in your heart that is not the case. If he can achieve this much of what he hopes to and what he's saying that he can, well, then he can consider himself fortunate. But he's missing some significant pieces and information, and his world is not going to hold together for very long. You and I have said, even today, when the Holy Spirit is removed for a time, everything that holds this world together, when God says, step back, first of all, he can never fully step back, or we would just plummet. Earth would go shooting out into the cosmos somewhere. I mean, who knows? Right into the sun or something if he took his mind off the orbit, But he will allow certain things. He will withhold himself to the degree, I think, that he withheld himself from Jesus when Jesus had to die on the cross. When he knew the future, so he knew that in order to justify righteousness, blood had to be shed. And the only worthy sacrifice was an unblemished Lamb of God, and that's what he represented. So the restraint that God used within himself to not help his son in that moment of pain and agony, I think is going to be the same restraint, or greater, that he uses when he has to step back from his creation for just a short time. It will seem like an eternity to those here on earth, but for just a short time. Because he says, if I didn't cut it short, nobody would live. Nobody would live. So you know, he will restrain himself, but when he does, he had to give specific instructions to Satan, and it's in his word. Do not touch the trees. Do not touch the grass. Because God knows that there's a certain amount of things that need to stay operating if anyone's going to survive.
Mm-hmm.
So those things are important to the atmosphere and to the air that we breathe. You know, trees really do absorb quite a bit
Mm-hmm.
to help us.
Yep.
And so, you know, we have to understand that when God withholds a part of himself, even a small part of himself, that it's going to change the dynamic on earth significantly. As much as we are looking at 5G, 6G, 7G, synthetically, mechanically affecting humanity, and it will,
Mm-hmm.
that is just a representation, I think, also of the Holy Spirit withholding himself in terms of the protection, if I can make that correlation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, Satan always, always, always copies God or tries to do the opposite of him, or put his spin on it, no pun intended, his version of it.
Yep.
You know, but God does it all 100% complete. We're seeing in quantum computing that he has to be satisfied with good enough.
That's right. Probabilities.
So, you know, we need to understand he doesn't have the whole picture. His world will not hold together, Satan that is, when he's in control. It will not hold together for very long.
Yep.
Because God has all of the key components that are needed and necessary. He has the blueprint. He is the architect. He has the plans. And he knows how this earth works. Satan observed it. He in the cosmos, or Satan's attempt at trying to create or recreate what God was doing
And
in the dark, doing it in the dark.
Another webinar.
Yeah,
another
that's my own thinking. I think that the moon and all of it, you know, it's like the moon is like a target practice for every meteor that's running around up in space, you know, and here he was trying to create something. He was watching God and he's like, yeah, I can create a blue ball. Watch this. And then he didn't even know it was blue because there was no light. And you can tell from all the planets, you know, there's ice on them. And
You're going to have people throwing darts at you saying Satan didn't create it and God created them. But anyway, that's for another time.
Could. But I'm just saying, you know, he was trying to recreate, and he had an idea of what God was doing. I mean, that's obvious because of how he's able to interact even at the level that he is right now with humanity. So he's got some knowledge, but he doesn't have it all. But a little knowledge can be dangerous.
And we'll go back to a little bit of knowledge here and wrap this up. This is basically something that is growing. This whole exponential growth, this doubling of doubling, is something that they did not expect. And I already read this to you, but I want to go back and just reinforce this point here, this statement that was made. And see if I can find it real quickly, because it's getting late for everybody. Okay. Well, Nevin said that as a result, Google is preparing to reach quantum supremacy, the point at which quantum computers start to outperform supercomputers simulating quantum algorithms. That's what we've been talking about in the Wednesday live stream, and has, you know, been talked an awful lot about in articles over the last week. They have achieved, according to their definition, quantum supremacy in only a matter of months, not years, is what they said. The doubling of doubling, and there was a statement that he made in here, and I'm just trying to find it. It may have been in a different article, but
no, it's in here. I remember seeing doubling.
Yeah.
Doubling.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It looks like nothing is happening, and then whoops, suddenly you're in a different world, he said. That's what we're experiencing here. This doubling of exponential growth is something that they never expected. According to this article, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But let me share this with you, that what is happening here is, I can imagine somebody listening to this and thinking, okay, so you've got these qubits on a chipset, and they're wired together. Does that mean that the wires are replicating? Does that mean that it's like, you know, some kind of a plant with roots that's just rapidly growing and expanding the number of roots? Is it a physical doubling of doubling? No, it's a mathematical. So let me put myself back on camera so I can kind of use my hands to illustrate this. Again, on Wednesday, I'll provide some graphics. But let's say you have a 0 and a 1. And they are quantum bits. And they come together, they interweave together. So I'll just put it horizontal, and now this is your one qubit, a single qubit. All right? But you have an interweaving of 0 and 1. That's superposition, where 0 can be a 1 and 1 can be a 0. So they're interweaved together, and that's one qubit. That's the binary system of classical computing and the early binary system of quantum computing. Now, with the doubling of the doubling, we're going to take the same qubit we have here, and we're going to interweave 0 and 1 and make another qubit. And if you can imagine, my hands are stacked upon each other. So I'll just use one hand on top of the other to illustrate this. This is the doubling of the doubling right here. And if you think of the interweaving as branching or as dendrites in the human brain, the wiring, what they call Josephson junctions, those are niobium or niobium wires that are superconducting when they're brought down to a few degrees above Kelvin, a few degrees of Kelvin above absolute zero. Cryogenic cooling, niobium wire becomes superconducting. And those are the Josephson junctions that connect. So think of my fingers as Josephson junctions. So you have a more complex, when they're stacked, a more complex interweaving of Josephson junctions. Mathematically, this means you are not just doubling, but you're doubling that doubling, translated as this complex interweaving on the chipset of the qubits. Now, if you want to think kind of like a science fiction movie, you could imagine wires that are replicating themselves and becoming more densely interwoven together. Another way to look at it is what I've described regarding dendrites in the human brain and the neurons. Remember, I've said, and I did this in the last issue of Entangled magazine, talking about the connecting of neurons. So you have random patterns of neurons in the brain, and you have connections to neurons, and that's a thought, or it's implanting a memory. But you have one pattern, and at the end of my fingertips are neurons that are being connected. And that lasts for, let's call it a femtosecond. And then they all disconnect. And then in a completely different pattern, they connect with completely different sets of neurons for a new thought. And reestablishing in a different pattern is very much what is happening with the Google chipset. I want to stress, again, this is mathematics, not physical connecting and disconnecting, but it is mathematical modeling of those connections taking place between qubits. There's a fixed number of qubits, just like there's a fixed number of neurons in the brain, but the way that they are connected in patterns. And so then we see that reference back to geomancy of the basic 16 figures. How many different ways can you shuffle the figures around? How many different ways can you connect the figures? Well, in geomancy, there's a limit, there's a ceiling of 65,536 possible configurations of the basic 16. I offer this to you. Despite all the big, huge, infinite numbers that I've cited from this article, God has set a threshold, a practical threshold, a realistic, a tangible, a physical threshold for quantum computing. Yes, mathematically you can extrapolate numbers out into infinity as far as you want, mathematically, beyond the capability of a classical supercomputer. Now that you have quantum, you can make numbers that are so large that they appear infinite, and that's fine, but that's just mathematical computation. But in its application to solve real-world problems, to make it relevant, I offer to you, and I'm going to put the graphic back up there, the threshold of geomancy. It's coming up. Come on. There it goes. When we look at the fourth position on this chart provided by Google, where they have 16 binary bits in a classical computer and 2 to the 16th binary bits in the quantum computer, totals 65,536. That's the ceiling. That's the threshold. I offer to you, and this is, you know, call it my insight shared with Kathleen, our insight together, that because, and then we're going to end on this, because the operating system is geomantic, because God limited the geomantic practice by the fallen angels, who then communicated the practice of geomancy to man, God created a threshold, not a threshold, but a ceiling for that geomantic practice of 65,536. I suggest to you that quantum computers, in terms of solving real problems, having real application, having relevancy to reality, will likewise be limited at 65,536 connections of qubits. Their processing power will be limited there. Again, that's irrespective of mathematical modeling. I'm saying the practical use of the machine will be stopped. It will be, as a computer term, it will be halted. That's a real term. Halted at 65,536, because the operating system is based on geomancy. It cannot exceed that threshold, that ceiling, that limitation, because the limitation of geomancy is the limitation of its modern version in quantum computing. We'll see what kind of articles come out relative to that number. We've kind of joked that, you know, we don't sell t-shirts here, but if we were to put together some Teespring t-shirts or something, the first t-shirt we would produce would just have the number across it, 65,536, because that's, as far as I'm concerned, you want to talk about a private or public key for encryption. You want to put a number to the key to the bottomless pit. It's pure conjecture. Can't back it up with scripture other than Revelation 9:1, and the key will be given to the angel who's cast to heaven and given the key to the bottomless pit. I'm going to say 65,536 perhaps is that, and I'm going to call it a private key because it's God's private number. That's the private key that encrypted the instructions on how to open the bottomless pit, which the bottomless pit, as far as we're concerned, is that infinite string of numbers begun to illustrate, not completed, but was the beginning was illustrated in this article. The bottomless pit has been mathematically modeled in this article. That's what stunned me. That's what I saw. A mathematical model to the bottomless pit in quantum computing. And what that means to the computer scientists is their level of frustration. Because the numbers will continue to exponentially increase, but never end. It's like the particle physicists at CERN who are trying to find the singularity, the particle that gave rise to all other matter. As they continue to collide and split and fracture, as some people call them, rocks, into smaller components, all the time trying to subdivide like a Cantor set. If you know anything about Cantor sets, C-A-N-T-O-R, Cantor sets in mathematics, you can take a line and you can divide it in half. And you can take one of those halves and divide it in half. Then you can take one of those halves and divide it in half. Like an algorithm, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. That's what a Cantor set does. And you can continue dividing and dividing and dividing infinitely, but at some point, your computer's going to halt. At some point, you as a human will say, I'm not going to subdivide any further because it exceeds the practical application of any further dividing taking place. What will happen mathematically with quantum computers will happen with those at CERN with particle physics. They will continue like a Cantor set to divide particles, but they're never going to find the singularity because God won't allow it. There's a halting point. Computer scientists can run their exponential numbers to the longest possible infinite string of integers past the decimal point that they want. But their frustration is they know they will never find the endpoint of those numbers. Therefore, those numbers, having no endpoint, model the bottomless pit. That's why I'm saying this quantum computer, this chipset, has just presented, I'm not saying that it opened the bottomless pit, I'm saying that this quantum computer is modeling, representing in numbers what would be considered a bottomless pit in the pursuit of those numbers by scientists. And that's their point of frustration because it doesn't end. And when this fully manifests, as Kathleen was saying, fully manifests upon the world as what they have created through quantum computing and AI, their hearts will fail them because they have opened the bottomless pit through technology. It has no end until God, until Jesus Christ, shortens the days, otherwise no man will survive. That's the interpretation of that scripture, of that verse that we offer to you. The shortening has to be done because the computer is advancing so quickly in its neuron connections. It's exponential, it's doubling of doubling so fast that if the time allowed for that doubling to take place was not stopped, was not halted, it would lead to the destruction of the human race. God, knowing that at some point he has to shorten the days, which means halting the progress of quantum computing's doubling of doubling. That's what we got out of that article. I think you'd agree with me that's pretty astounding application of that verse and interpretation of that verse of shortening of the time. Otherwise, no man would survive, because if God allowed the fullness of time to proceed, that computer would get to the point where it would destroy mankind. But God's in control, and God controls time, and God will shorten the days. There you go. Go ahead.
I think that it goes back to the visual that God gave me about him being 28 steps ahead. A number of people have asked, as a matter of fact, about that webinar. And it's the full spectrum dominance. It's the art of war.
That was the first one. It was after that. I think it was the fullness of the Gentiles.
Fullness of the Gentiles. Now, if they're Patreon subscribers,
they get it for free. It's in the archives.
Okay, it's in the archives section.
Yep.
Okay, very good.
Yep.
And if they're not Patreon members, they can purchase it from your website, the Anthony Patch website, correct?
For $10 in the store.
Okay.
Yep.
I wanted you to go back, if you would, to the document that you were just reading, because, again, I want to highlight this labor pains thing, because something jumped off that page at me. No?
I know. I'm trying to find it, but it looks like they took the page down. That's where it was.
Hit reload.
It says, aw, snap. Don't you just love it? That's where our article was. Yeah, I'm going to try to reload it. Getting there.
See what it says.
They didn't like me reading it. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so go down to the bottom where you were just reading the very last thing about, you know, it looks like nothing's happening. I think it's down
Here it is. Here it is.
Okay. Okay, it says,
looks like
he revealed that what he and the rest of the Google quantum computing team were looking at was the doubly exponential growth of quantum computing power relative to classical computing. It looks like nothing is happening. Nothing is happening, and then whoops, suddenly you're in a different world, he said. That's what we're expecting here, or experiencing here. When a woman is in labor, and it seems like it is taking forever, it seems that for the longest time, you know, they may be 1 or 2 centimeters dilated and, you know, can pretty much still do anything, you know, and then they go into the hospital, and then it just seems to stop, and they're like, nothing is happening, and then boom, all of a sudden it happens. And so again, I like to highlight these things that
correspond to the verses.
Correspond to where we're actually at right now in terms of the birth pains and the advanced stage, and, you know, reaching that 10 mark in computing is like reaching the 10 centimeter mark of about ready to give birth right now.
Yep.
I mean, you and I looked at each other today in the car. You know, we were doing what we needed to do outside, and then we were talking, and we didn't even get, when we pulled up to our house, we didn't even get out of the car because the intensity of understanding what was coming upon this earth and where we really are, and just that overwhelming feeling that we had that just stopped us both, and we just sat there and we couldn't even really get out of the car because we were talking about the gravity of it all.
Yep.
And to say that we really are, this is the time, this is the culmination of all things now. Now. It
has to be.
You know, it's no longer, oh, you know, they've been saying that from the beginning of time, and look, everything's as it was. You know, nothing has changed. You know, there's always, every generation has. No.
No generation has ever had
all of this happening at once.
The coalescence of all these things coming together as it is.
Even the Jews, even the Kabbalists are saying Mashiach is like at the door.
Yep. Yep, we had Rabbi Itzhak Kaduri's his prophecy, and now we've got the 70 nation representatives coming together with the Sanhedrin that's going on right now. And so I wanted to offer, just parenthetically, I know we're way over time. Please watch, in terms of the peace accord, please watch for indications that the peace accord is going to be, the peace plan is going to be announced. The subtext to the peace plan being announced, please watch for the Palestinians, which this whole peace accord is focused upon, the Palestinians giving their blessing to the building of the temple on the Temple Mount. The significance of the Palestinians giving their blessing means they're going to go forward in rapid fashion, and I believe it will be done with 3D printing construction. Think about the Arch of Baal, B-A-A-L, Baal or Baal, that made its way around to different countries several years ago. It was 3D printed. That reproduction was 3D printed, okay? Concrete, stone. I offer to you, they're going to use 3D printing in rapid order to build the temple. That's a sidebar. The point here is watch for the Palestinians. If they say, we're in agreement with the peace plan, and that is an indicator that they're going to give their blessing to the building of the temple on the Temple Mount. That's a marker in time for you to watch for.
A couple of questions, if you can
take
a few
sure.
questions now. Let's see. Tamara was saying, I heard if you keep cutting something in half, it loses locality. What do you think?
That is true, except that you have to be able to define locality. If you're saying with the premise of locality that you can actually locate something, that you can actually pinpoint its position. See, that's the struggle with locality when you're talking particle physics, because fundamental particles are always in movement. Therefore, locality is amorphous. Locality is nothing more than a probability. This is the essence of quantum computing, because it's based upon the probable position, the probable location at any given moment in time of an electron, which is always in movement due to its inherent momentum. So locality is a struggle. It leads to the probable location, and the probability is a prognostication. It is a prediction into the future as to the probable location that an electron will occupy at that future moment. See, this is the essence of probability. When we banter back and forth this word of probability in quantum mechanics and quantum computing specifically, locality and probability are handshakes, because you are predicting the location. And this again leads to prognostication. Scientifically, it's focused on the locale of the electron or the proton, okay? But because there's a spiritual component to this, that is a divination process of prognosticating the future using the movement of electrons and the predictive location of that electron. Again, as a handshake, two sides of the same coin. The same coin is geomancy, and the two sides, one side is the scientific particle physics, the other side of the geomantic coin is the spiritual divination of future events. Future events are tied to electrons because future events are physical and energetic. Same as an electron is both physical and energetic. A future event in our reality is based upon electrons and protons and other fundamental particles. So to say that you are predicting the future location of those particles in movement is the same thing in geomancy as saying I'm predicting the future. Okay?
Susan needs us to clarify. She said 65,536 is the number of the bottomless pit. Do I understand that correctly? It's not the number of the bottomless pit.
My conjecture, again, let's take a big pinch of salt here, okay? Big grain of salt. I'm conjecturing that 65,536 is the key to decrypt the instructions to open the bottomless pit. Because the angel's cast from heaven and is given the key to the bottomless pit. So let's define key. I'm simply using one, of which there could be several definitions of the key. I'm simply using a cryptographic explanation of defining the key as possibly a private key that encrypted instructions on how to open the bottomless pit. I'm just saying, because if you read up on cryptography, it's all numbers. Just like RSA coding is 256-bit or 512 bits. I'm talking 65,536 bits comprising the key to encrypt a set of instructions. That's a very big private key, by the way.
I would say the 65,536, with respect to my focus in studying geomancy, again, studying the mechanics of it, not to be, I don't even have to say that anymore. I'm not even going to bother saying it. I don't use it for prognosticating, but just to understand and to be able to relate it to technology. I see that as being the key to understanding, again, semantically.
Sure.
But it is the key to understanding how it is that they come up with the one of 65,536 combinations of bringing answers together. You know, again, if you understand the process of geomancy and how it self-generates to pull the whole chart together, the 4 can bring about the 16. The 4 lines that make up one geomantic figure.
Yep.
You do 4 times in a row, so you do dots with 4, dots with 4, dots with 4, dots with 4, and you don't think about what you're doing. And then you add them up and you come up with 4 geomantic figures. Well, once you have those 4, the process takes on a life of its own.
Right.
And it starts generating the others. That's all you need is those 4. You need 16 lines from an individual.
Yep.
Any person on the face of the earth, you just need them to make 16 rows of dots. Don't even count them, don't even think about it.
Or 16 bits.
Or just keep tapping in your phone and they'll do it for you. They're on the other side of that black screen, that black mirror,
and
they're pulling that
one pattern out of 65,536 produces one answer.
Well, I think that they can see more into it. You know, when we talk, you see movies out there. I haven't seen it, but I know that they talk about scrying in that Black Mirror movie that I can imagine what it is. I never saw it, but, you know, again, our phones are that black mirror in a sense. That it is the scrying, but it is also the black mirror that you are made to think that you're accessing a certain type of information, where in fact on the other side they're taking your taps and electronic pulses and using them. So, but in a geomantic reading, you can ask a number of questions. They just need you. They need a human being to put in these 16 lines, generate the first 4 with 4 lines in each one, and then it will take on its own life and it will generate a full chart for you. And so at that point, you can then begin to speak about certain questions. They tell you to focus on a certain thing. It could be an upcoming marriage, or it could be a job change, or it could be, you know, the peace plan. When's a good time to announce this peace plan?
Yep.
And so then once they have that information, it lays out a wider picture. You could do a quick reading, if you will, you know, and again, I mean, a tea leaf reader or fortune teller could do any of this, but this is a little bit more detailed. And you know, so I think what we need to understand, and I'm losing my train of thought on this as I'm talking.
Well, just that.
Oh, 65,536. Right. I'm sorry. There are all of these different combinations that can come together that are dependent on the things that we've talked about. You know, you not only get the reading, but you have to take into effect then the cosmological and the astronomical factors. And all of that is already programmed, if you will, into a quantum computer.
Yep.
So that they can take this information and then the computer can begin to run all of the varying combinations.
Yep.
And
but
be able
only
to
to 65,000.
Only to 65,536. So in a sense, the key to the bottomless pit is the understanding that all of these combinations can give answers from the darkness. Out of the darkness supposedly comes these answers that illuminates your life and the answers that you need. So it's
let me bring it to a tangible. We talk about Los Alamos National Laboratory, Lockheed, Volkswagen, NSA, Google themselves was a first investor in D-Wave, has a D-Wave quantum computer. Okay. What these guys are doing is not so much routing of taxi cabs, as they often cite, or determining the laminar flow on the wing of a Lockheed aircraft, whatever it may be. Los Alamos modeling, you know, nuclear detonations. Whatever the research that's going on, that's for public consumption. Those are the things you'll read in the papers and in the magazines, okay? What we're sharing with you is the above top secret, if you want to put that kind of a label on it, the above top secret application of these computers. I understand, you know, a scientist from Los Alamos using a D-Wave computer to model particle physics has no thought of geomancy. Okay? Right. None whatsoever. Right. But the people who made the decision to buy that computer, they're using it for geomantic purposes. And what is that purpose?
Control.
It is control through the receipt of information, because this is where the insights come from. This is where the above top secret information comes from, is through the divinatory process that then results in new developments in technology, what we call the evidence of evil. Okay? But no scientist is going to agree with what I just said. But the unique, cutting-edge insights, the leaps in technology, such as we just demonstrated tonight, doesn't come from man's own knowledge, scientific knowledge, research and development, step-by-step empirical process of scientific research. No. And this has been proven in the scholarly works on geomancy all down through the ages. The leaps in technology, obvious example are the Nazis. Okay, if you want a very simplistic example. But understand that the laboratories and at Google and D-Wave themselves and IBM themselves, those at the very top rung of the echelons use quantum computers for divination, plain and simple. taking in all the random number generation that's going on in the world into their laboratories that is specific to what they're involved in. And lastly, please understand, and I revealed this back in 2016 at a conference that I was speaking at, the last one I did and probably the last one I will ever be involved in. I revealed in my Sunday presentation, following on from a Friday presentation, that the quantum computers are networked. It doesn't matter that they're at Los Alamos, NSA's facility, Google down in, the Silicon Valley. It doesn't matter, because these are quantum computers that are accessing, as Geordie Rose calls them, parallel dimensions. They're accessing the spiritual realm. Therefore, they're accessing the same realm. And therefore, because it's the same realm, they are all networked together. You want to talk about doubling of the doubling. This goes so far beyond what Google's putting out in this article. And I shared this in 2016. Imagine the power of more than one quantum computer tied into an identical twin quantum computer. Now you multiply it by, let's say, a dozen of those, and you have the essence in 2048 Diamonds in the Rough that I completed reading to you on Thursday. There were 7 computers that were networked. I published that in 2014. Network quantum computers. And I said this, and I said this in 2016 in the presentation, we cannot even imagine the number of parallel dimensions they're accessing. Translation, Kathleen gave you one definition of parallel dimensions, of dimensions. I'll give you another example, and that is, when they say dimension, think demon. When they say dimension, think of the realm of fallen angels. We don't know how many fallen angels there are. It's a third of the angels from heaven. We know that. But we don't know how many a third is. So when they're talking about accessing now with the upcoming 5,000 qubit, which is the 4096, 2 to the 4096th power of demons, that's a lot of demons. That's a lot of information coming through. And that is an exponential increase in the amount of information. And the exponential increase in the amount of information results in an exponential increase in the evidence of evil in technologies to be used in a malevolent fashion against the human race. Therefore, again, God cutting short the days so that some of us will survive of humanity. I think that's astounding when you sit back and think about it that way. And you may have to play this live stream over to really, really understand the stun value of all this information that Kathleen and I experienced today. Okay? Because you're just getting it for the first time. Another question, maybe?
Yeah.
I want to be respectful of you guys. You've been here for 3 hours now. Oh my goodness. This live stream is one for the books. So while Kathleen's looking for questions in the chat room, again, a program note, I'm going to follow up on Wednesday and I'll go back through some of this stuff, and again, I'll take more time on the technical to explain deeper definitions and explanations of the technical stuff. And I'll have graphics for you, and you'll have Entangled Magazine in front of you for October. All this is that we've shared with you tonight is God revealing what they're doing behind closed doors, behind the curtain, behind the veil. God isn't trying to scare us, and neither are Kathleen and myself. We are passionate about this because this is so clear, the implications of this information coming our way. And that's why we're passionate about sharing it with you. So on that point, if you will allow me, I'm going to ask our webmaster, Doug Diamond, to make this recording available to the public through YouTube and also the Wednesday live stream. Okay? I think you would agree with me that we shouldn't just hold it to the Patreon community, this revelation. And so, with your permission, I'm going to go forward with Doug and do that, and it will be on YouTube. It'll make it easy for you to share with people. Okay? So if you've got people that have even a glimmer of interest in any of this, just direct them to the YouTube channel, and they can take 3 hours and listen to this if they choose to. Okay?
I did want to say
Yeah,
just one more thing,
sure.
and it was along the lines of what you were saying about the networking of the computers in your book and believing that they are networked. We know that China has requested and received a D-Wave computer.
Yep, several years ago.
Yeah, and I have joked that that's because they're better diviners. But there are better diviners than the Chinese. The Chinese like to lay claim that they are the most ancient of civilizations, and that is not true.
No, it is not.
We go back to, again, the Mesopotamia region. We go back to Egypt. We go back to Israel.
Yep, the Jordan Valley.
And it follows in that crescent, if you will. And we go back to the time of the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Akkadians, the Sumerians, and what they used for divination. And from the trade routes, because they were the intelligentsia of the time. And so they came from China over to the Mesopotamia region to learn. That region now we know of as Iraq and Iran. And, you know, I would say that, you know, the Chinese need to be very careful because there's better diviners than them out there, and they're found in Iraq and Iran. And, you know, we were just bantering back and forth ourselves today, and we were talking about, you know, the Jews coming to understand who Jesus is. And I said, you know, one thing that we need to think about, there are a lot of Christians that align themselves with Israel. And yet Israel is so steep in the Kabbalistic methodology, religion, whatever you want to call it. And yet Christians are aligning themselves with a nation who, for the most part, their religion is Kabbalism. And that is so... It's not honoring Jesus at all. And yet we point the finger at the Arabs or the Lebanese or the, you know, the Muslim religion, and we say, oh, they're all bad. They are no worse in their belief system than what the Kabbalists are doing. The Kabbalists are worse. And they've oppressed the Arabs. They have. They've oppressed them. Now, I'm not drumming up a pity party for them. I'm not doing that. But I said, we have to realize that God did not destroy Ishmael.
That's right.
They said that they'd be fighting and warring until the very end, and they will be. They are children of Abraham. And I think some Christians forget the fact that they are aligning themselves with a political system in Israel that has its roots in Kabbalah. The Arabs have their belief in Muhammad. So when you look as a Christian, you're saying, okay, well, wait a minute. you're pointing at one, you're looking at this nation that Jesus came from, and you're espousing everything wonderful and aligning yourself with it, but they don't honor God through Kabbalah. They honor men and energy and their ascension to be God-like.
And build a temple.
Exactly. And so I said to you, I bet, even though the Muslims believe in Muhammad, I bet they are more open and have more information than they have ever even let on about Jesus.
Sure.
And that has been suppressed by Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Because Israel doesn't want them. The Arabs probably have so much information about the prophet Daniel and what he did. They know what you and I are talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm not siding with them. I'm only saying that I think they would be more open to understanding a deeper understanding of who Jesus Christ is than those who are aligned with Kabbalah.
Yep.
The Jews aligned with a Kabbalistic mindset and theology.
Who are focused on the Antichrist.
Yeah.
Their Mashiach is the Antichrist. That's who they're focused on, and why they're building the temple, because they want to usher in the age of the Antichrist for the redemption of the human race, Tikkun, for the ascension to Keter, the top of the Sephiroth tree.
Yeah.
That is completely Antichrist.
Yep. I mean, they both have their... I don't agree with either one of them. I don't agree with Kabbalah. I don't... Obviously, my faith is not in the Muslim Muhammad religion.
Right.
But
sure.
But the thing is I'm just trying to get people to see the absurdity as a Christian in aligning yourself with basically a political system. You know, and that's what I'm focusing on, a political
Zionism.
System. Exactly.
Zionism.
You know, but wrapped up in that is a religious belief system that no Christian should be aligned with. No Christian should be aligned with a Kabbalistic mindset at all.
And aligning with the Sanhedrin,
And
bringing together the 70 nations, and with that proclaiming the Noahide laws as the laws of the planet. Kabbalah.
And those laws will be carried out in the Masonic temples found in every city, town, across the country, not just our country, but across the world.
Those will be the courtrooms.
Those will be the courtrooms of the universal system of law and religion.
Yep.
We're telling it to you right now, and you know, somebody at some point will say, "Where did I hear that?" But between you and I, we were saying that we think that, you know, the Arab culture will probably be more open to understanding because they have a lot of truthful information about Jesus.
Yep.
And, you know, again, are they in any different place in terms of understanding than Israel right now? Israel doesn't accept Jesus.
That's right.
The Muslims don't accept Jesus as we believe them to. But Christians are willing to side with an Israeli agenda, Kabbalistic agenda, and political system of Zionism.
Mm-hmm.
And then they want to say, oh, the Arabs are bad. They're no worse off. They both of them don't believe in Jesus. But I say the Arabs would be more open to understanding. And if God came with a revelation and said, you know what? Let me tell you who Jesus is. They've got the seed of Abraham in them. God made a way for Ishmael to make a life of his own. It wasn't easy because there was an order and structure to family.
Yep.
Then Abraham was a patriarch, but Ishmael is still his blood.
Yep.
And that says something. That says something. And Israel has been trying to squash him for the longest time.
Yep.
And I say they'll probably come to an understanding, a greater understanding, as God reveals to them. I'm not forcing them away from their belief system, and I'm not saying that I applaud it either. It's not my belief system.
Right.
But all of us are in varying stages of understanding who Jesus are. There are people that profess to be Christians because they're Catholics or Protestants or Presbyterians or Episcopalians or Catholics, and they all say that they know who Jesus is, but do they really have a relationship with him? Do they really know who he is? So even the Christian denominations are at varying stages of understanding who the Son of God is.
Yep.
And even being able to come to know him as the Son of God. That's no different than these other religions when God presents the truth. And this unveiling, I believe, of quantum supremacy and quantum everything, you know, the revealing that this has at its core its foundation based in divination, which is accessing Satan for information. It's not accessing God.
That's right.
There was a time that divination was used to get an answer, a yes or no answer. You know, and again, we've talked about the priest in the temple.
But that was before the Holy Spirit.
The Holy Spirit, that's right. So I just think that it's interesting. And again, we're just letting you in on some of the conversations that Anthony and I have. We're not making a mass political statement. We are not putting anything in writing. We are simply sharing with you behind the scenes some of the things that we talk about and banter back and forth with. And it just seemed ludicrous to me that, you know, Christians would align themselves, you know, with an antichrist religion and belief system, which Kabbalah is. And it is what fuels not just politics in Israel, but around the world.
Certainly does.
They're very wealthy because when you serve Satan, he pays you. He pays you very well. He makes you an offer you can't refuse. So,
all right, let's wrap this up.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for being with us for 3.5 hours. I hope you don't have to get up as early in the morning as my poor wife Kathleen does, but I hope it was worth it. And if you have questions that we're not able to address right now, go ahead and email them over to me, and Kathleen and I will do the best we can to explain. But again, October 1 issue, Entangled, is going to go into this, and we will talk on Wednesday again, Lord willing. Thank you. God bless every one of you, and thank you for your friendship, and we will talk to you soon.
Okay, have a great week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.